Within the sect master's palace, Jian Wushuang looked at the divine corpse of Taro, who was giving off the aura of an intermediate supreme, and nodded in satisfaction. It was not wrong to say that the divine corpse Taro was Jian Wushuang's second avatar. The stronger Taro's corpse was, the stronger Jian Wushuang would be. This gave Jian Wushuang more confidence in the upcoming battle of catastrophe. With a wave of his hand, Jian Wushuang put the corpse back into the heaven-suppressing monument. Then, he sat in the center of the 8 trigrams array and began to absorb the void power. A large amount of void power was absorbed into Jian Wushuang's body. Then, it was transformed into the purest divine power through the void power crystal core. This made Jian Wushuang feel very comfortable. The next morning, Jian Wushuang called for a morning meeting. This was the homework that he had to do as a sect master. The content of the morning meeting was very simple. All the elders would report the situation of the sect, such as the recent major events in the universe, or which talented disciple in the sect showed signs of breaking through to the scar level, and so on. Generally speaking, it was just some trivial matters and a mere formality. It was the same for today's morning meeting. After Jian Wushuang asked some regular questions, the elders left one after another. On the throne, Jian Wushuang massaged the space between his eyebrows, feeling a little tired. It had to be said that being the sect master was tiring. Not only did he have to cultivate by himself, but he also had to manage tens of thousands of disciples in the sect. The amount of effort he had to put in was simply unparalleled. Sect master. After everyone had left, Zhou Sha, who had an enchanting figure and a charming face and was wearing a light red dress, quietly walked over. She stood behind Jian Wushuang and stretched out her slender fingers to massage his shoulders. As soon as her hands touched Jian Wushuang's shoulders, Jian Wushuang suddenly stood up as if he had been electrocuted. He frowned and asked her coldly, "What are you doing?" "Ah!" Zhou Sha was startled by Jian Wushuang's tone, and a look of panic flashed across her face. "Sect master, I just saw that you were tired, so I wanted to help you relieve your fatigue." "No need," Jian Wushuang said coldly. "Sect master, didn't you just ask me to serve you well a few days ago?" Zhou Sha was startled when she heard this, and then she said with a blank expression, "Just a few days ago." After the morning meeting, Wushuang grabbed her hand with a smile and asked her to serve him well. For this reason, she had specially worn a more revealing red tulle today. One could vaguely see the spring light in her red dress, showing off her good figure. Why did the sect master suddenly change his face today? Wasn't this change in attitude a little too fast? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's mouth twitched. He did not need to think to know that this was a trick played by the corpse of Supreme Taro. "No need, I don't need a maid." Jian Wushuang suppressed his anger and said, "Zhou Sha, from now on, you are no longer my maidservant. Return to the limestone mountain and cultivate. Cultivation is the foundation." Upon hearing this, Zhou Sha's body trembled and her face turned pale. Although Jian Wushuang's words were tactful, to put it bluntly, he was driving her away. "I understand." Zhou Sha bit her lower lip and nodded. Then, she left in a somewhat embarrassed manner. Jian Wushuang looked at Zhou Sha's back and could not help shaking his head slightly. Then he turned around, pressed the secret room button in the sect master's bedroom, and stepped into the secret room. After entering the bedroom, Jian Wushuang sat down on the 8 trigrams yin-yang formation. A large amount of void power gushed toward him. Now that the battle between the void universe and the divine power universe was about to start, he had to seize every minute to improve his strength. At the same time, in the 87th void rift, within the beehive-like palace complex in the center palace, thud thud thud, a series of heavy footsteps could be heard. The 34 void masters strode into the main hall. "Lord Void God, all the cracks in the void forbidden land have been checked." On the throne in the hall, a low voice came from the cocoon. "Eh? Did you find anything?" As soon as he finished speaking, a void master with eyes and no hands stepped out and replied, "Lord Void God, you're so wise. When we checked the 23rd crack, we found that it could lead to the divine power universe. It's just a pity that we didn't manage to capture the black-robed man who escaped into our universe." After a pause, the low and hoarse voice that sounded like a man and a woman came out of the cocoon again. If that's the case, then let's start the great catastrophe ahead of schedule. As soon as these words fell, the faces of everyone in the hall changed, and then joy gushed out of their eyes. Hearing the words of Lord Void God, could it be Lord Void God had completely recovered? Crack, crack, crack. Before they could think further, a crack appeared on the cocoon wrapped in layers of white silk. Wisps of pitch-black mist came out of the crack. Crack, crack, crack. Then, more and more cracks appeared. Finally, bang! An earth-shattering boom rang out, and the entire cocoon exploded. A tall figure shrouded in endless black mist slowly stood up from within the cocoon. His entire body was shrouded in a black mist, making it impossible to see him clearly. Only his pair of scarlet and evil eyes revealed a dominating and soul-stirring aura. Under this pair of eyes, the world had to bow its head and the universe had to boil. He was above all living beings, sitting alone on the clouds like a god, looking down on the world. We pay our respects to Lord Void God. We pay our respects to Lord Void God. Immediately, all the 34 Void Masters in the hall, including the left and right Void emissaries, knelt down. Whether they were the masters of holy lands, the sect metters of immortal orthodoxies, or extremely ancient existences, they all knelt at the feet of the figure in the black fog with extremely fanatical eyes. Void God, the master of the entire Void universe. No one dared to disobey his orders. He was the one and only heaven of the Void universe. Void God, who was covered in black mist, only glanced at them and said nothing. His figure rose straight into the air, as if Heaven's Duke was kneeling at his feet and lifting him up. It's been 100,000 Void eras. Cosmos God, it's time for us to meet again. Void God placed his hands behind his back and muttered to himself. His gaze seemed to penetrate through the two universes and see Cosmos God in the Divine Power universe. The next moment, he pressed his right hand down slightly. Let the battle of the Great Catastrophe War begin. Cosmic Calendar, Year 6523. The Second Great Catastrophe War, which was called the War of Changing Heavens by the later generations, had begun. That day, Void God led the 32 Void Masters and the left and right Void emissaries to attack the Divine Power universe through the 87th crack. Heaven and earth shook, and countless clouds churned. The world seemed to have fallen into an eternal winter night. The mountains and rivers reversed, the sun and moon changed colors, and even the stars in the sky dimmed. The sound of the great Tao came from the horizon, profound and mysterious. Except for some low-level Void warriors who did not know what was going on, the experts who had not reached the 87th crack were all shocked. They all looked at the Void forbidden land and murmured, "The great era is about to begin. Sky Glory Holy Land. Floating Tower." The floating tower was built in the deepest part of the Sky Glory Holy Land. No one could enter the floating tower except the current Holy Lord of the Sky Glory Holy Land and the Sky Glory Holy Sun, who had extra authority. This was because the floating tower was where the three great patriarchs of the Sky Glory Holy Land slept. The reason why the Sky Glory Holy Land was able to suppress everyone and become one of the strongest in the Void universe was because of the existence of these three Sky Glory patriarchs. Each of the three Sky Glory patriarchs was an old monster who had survived since ancient times. They had been in the realm of the Six-Scar Void Master for countless years. The three of them usually slept in the floating tower and would only come out when the Sky Glory Holy Land was in a life-and-death crisis. Now, no one knew that among the three Sky Glory patriarchs, besides the third patriarch who was still in the floating tower, the first and second patriarchs had already gone to the Void Forbidden Land and become one of the 34 Void Masters under Void God. Just as Void God led the crowd to set off the horn of the Battle of Great Catastrophe and officially attack the Divine Power universe, an old man in a black robe on the top floor of the floating tower, who had a rotten and ancient aura, slowly opened his eyes. A sharp ray of light flashed through his muddy eyes. Has the Great Catastrophe War begun? This man was the Sky Glory Holy Land's third patriarch. I hope this great catastrophe won't end so quickly. I've been waiting for far too long and I want to go up. The third patriarch muttered to himself, then closed his eyes again. In this battle of the great catastrophe, void gods could be said to have gathered all the top combat forces of the entire void universe. They were going all out. However, Void God did not gather all the top forces in the Void Forbidden Land. Instead, they divided them into several waves and kept changing. If any of the experts in front died or were seriously injured, they would retreat and be replaced. The Sky Glory Holy Land's third patriarch and the Palace Lord of the Dark Een Palace were in charge of the later waves of reinforcements. At the same time, in another Void Forbidden Land of the Void Universe, this place was shrouded in bone-corroding black fog and chilly wind all year round. It was a famous Void Forbidden Land in the Void Universe. Even a Scar-level Void Master would be blown away by the black fog and chilly wind if they came to this Void Forbidden Land. Therefore, the Void Universe was terrified of this Void Forbidden Land and never dared to set foot in it. However, the people at the peak of the Void Universe knew that this Void Forbidden Land was where the Devourers, the most mysterious organization in the entire universe, was located. At this moment, in the center of the Void Forbidden Land, an ancient bronze coffin was floating in the sky. The ancient bronze coffin was covered with mysterious blood-like patterns. Wisps of black mist and cold wind spread out from the cracks of the coffin. If anyone were to see this scene, they would definitely be dumbfounded and shocked. The black fog and Een wind that could destroy even a Scar-level Void Master was actually from a mere ancient bronze coffin. Around the ancient bronze coffin, more than 10 men and women in black clothes with powerful auras were sitting cross-legged quietly. If Jian Wushuang were here, he would have realized that some of the men and women with powerful auras were the mysterious experts who had chased after him in 9 Luminaries' great star field of the Divine Power Universe. As Void God led the Void Masters to attack the Divine Power Universe, the dozen men and women sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed seemed to sense something and open their eyes. Void God is finally going to attack the Divine Power Universe? A seductive woman with 2 ponytails, black clothes that only covered her buttocks, and a large chest with the words printed on the left side of her bright and transparent forehead laughed. Her name was Devour 4. She looked cute and playful like a young girl, but in fact, the number of people from the 2 universes who died in her hands was more than all the disciples of the God-refining sect combined. The 2 universes have been peaceful for too long. There's going to be a good show to watch this time. Another man from Devour said with a faint smile. Very quickly, these 10 or so black-robed men started discussing in low voices. Their faces were filled with excitement and strangeness. From their words and actions, no matter if they were void gods or cosmos gods, they did not have the slightest bit of respect for them. Just as everyone was discussing, an evil and lazy voice came out from the ancient bronze coffin. Devour 1, Devour 2, Devour 3, Devour 7, you guys go to the 2 universes and take a look. This sentence was obviously very ordinary, but his voice was full of charm, as if there were thousands of accentuations, constantly repeating in his ears. Yes, Lord Devouring Emperor. Hearing this man, all 7 of them stood up. Each of these 7 people had a powerful aura, and the man called Devour 1 had a profound cultivation base. Even a 6-scar Void Master would feel weak in front of him. He wore a red mask on his face, only revealing 1 eye. This eye actually had 3 pupils. Go on. A strange sound wave that seemed to be made up of countless sounds came from the bronze mirror. In the next moment, the bodies of 7 people, from Devour 1 to Devour 7, began to melt starting from their feet. After the 7 of them left, the Void Forbidden Land gradually returned to peace, leaving only the mumbling laughter from the ancient bronze coffin. Xianxia, I'll give you the results of the 2 universes you've chosen. Hurry up and show yourself. I can't help but wring your head off. With the activation of the Second Great Catastrophe War, the entire Void Universe was in turmoil. Countless ancient experts who were in seclusion were all awakened. Jian Wushuang, who was sitting cross-legged in the sect master's bedroom of the God-refining sect, suddenly opened his eyes. What's going on? Jian Wushuang's expression changed. Then he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in the sky above the God-refining sect. Jian Wushuang raised his head and looked at the sky. Suddenly, his pupils shrank as if he had seen something extraordinary. Jian Wushuang's eyes glowed. He could see the countless qi activities and fate energy of the void universe all surging toward the void forbidden land. Could it be that the great catastrophe war has begun? Jian Wushuang was shocked. Following that, a transmission from Cosmos God connected with Jian Wushuang. Lord Cosmos God, has the great catastrophe war started? Jian Wushuang asked after taking a deep breath. That's right. Void God has completely awakened and led the army of the void universe to attack the divine power universe. Cosmos God's tone had never been so heavy before. Then what should I do? Jian Wushuang asked. Cosmos God pondered for a moment before saying, Jian Wushuang, don't do anything for now. When the people in the void universe completely let down their guard and enter the divine power universe, I'll contact you, and you'll plant the Fengtian flag in the void forbidden land to block their escape. At that time, your mission will be completed, and this old man will do his best to kill them all. As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang could feel the killing intent in Cosmos God's voice, even though it was just a message. After a moment of silence, Jian Wushuang nodded heavily and said, All right. Although what Jian Wushuang wanted to do most now was to return to the foreign battlefield and kill everyone to vent his anger. He knew that he had more important things to do. In the battlefield, Jian Wushuang's absence would not affect the situation. However, what he was going to do next would, to a large extent, completely determine the life and death of the two universes. Well, Jian Wushuang, the situation is urgent, so I won't talk to you anymore. I'll contact you when I need you to set up the Fengtian flag. After saying that, Cosmos God hurriedly hung up the transmission. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Not long after the message was hung up, the 5 great Grand Elders, including Grand Elder Mi Feng, Grand Elder Qin Gu, and Grand Elder Ban Shan, all soared into the sky and stood beside Jian Wushuang. They squinted and looked up into the sky, and they all caught the invisible qi that kept surging toward the void forbidden land. Only Elder Mi Feng let out a soft sigh. The great catastrophe war is about to start. No matter if we win or lose, we will all pay a painful price. Why bother? After saying this, Elder Mi Feng let out a soft sigh. He was a rare non-warmonger in the void universe. Jian Wushuang and Elder Ban Shan did not speak. They just looked at each other. The two of them knew that the battle that would change the fate of their two universes had arrived. At the same time, in the off-world battlefield, Cosmos God had borrowed Jian Wushuang's name list and had already made various plans to deal with the 34 Void Masters. The Divine Power Universe was the main battlefield because of the Great Catastrophe. Therefore, the Divine Power Universe was several times more powerful than the Void Universe. On this day, the entire Divine Power Universe rumbled and the Great Tao wailed. The sky was gray and heavy rain fell. The heavy rain covered the entire Divine Power Universe. Countless thunderbolts exploded, and silver snakes danced like lightning. The entire Divine Power Universe seemed to have fallen into an apocalyptic world. Countless cultivators looked up at the sky in horror. They sent out their divine power and sensed that something was wrong. However, no matter how hard they tried, they could not figure out anything. As for the top sects in the Divine Power Universe, such as the 9 Emperor Pavilion, Cosmos Temple, and the Divine Life Palace, they all received the message from Cosmos God. As a result, the ancient mighty figures who had fallen into deep sleep woke up one after another. Divine Life Palace. After tens of thousands of years of recuperation, the Divine Life Palace had finally recuperated. Not only that, but Supreme Shuebo had also broken through to the half-invincible Supreme Realm. He was now the strongest person in the Divine Life Palace. As for Supreme Junfu, he had completely recovered from his previous injuries. Furthermore, his divine body seemed to have been reconstructed, and he was even more powerful than before. If he was allowed to grow, it wouldn't be long before he broke through to become a half-invincible Supreme. In addition, many ordinary Supremes had died in the Divine Life Palace. For example, the ruler Demonic Wind, who had once had a conflict with Jian Wushuang, had broken through to the primary Supreme Realm. Moreover, perhaps because the Cosmos Palace had also suffered great losses and was busy recuperating, a large amount of new blood had entered the Divine Life Palace. Although there were no perfect life forms like Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King, there were only a handful of special life forms at the creation stage. It could be predicted that the Divine Life Palace would be full of vitality in the future, and all kinds of new talents would spring up like bamboo shoots after the rain. At that time, the Divine Life Palace would reach a new peak. Just as the Second Great Catastrophe War broke out, Shuebo, Junfu, and the other Supremes who had been in the middle of a discussion in the Supreme Temple changed their expressions. Their figures suddenly swept out and came to the empty hall. Above the 9 heavens, the chi dynamic was in chaos as violent thunderbolts exploded continuously with crackling sounds. Electric snakes shuttled and danced in the gray clouds, emitting white lightning. The strong wind roared like a giant beast, as if it was roaring in one's ears. The faces of Supreme Shuebo and the others immediately changed. They were all powerhouses who had participated in the Great Catastrophe. Although they were still weak at that time and only played the role of flag-waving and cheering, they were all too familiar with this scene. This was the result of the collision of the laws between the two universes, resulting in the fluctuations of the universe. Jun Fu, Tian Yi, you two are in charge of guarding the Divine Life Palace. I'll go to the off-world battlefield to take a look, Supreme Shuebo said in a deep voice after taking a deep breath. Supreme Jun Fu and Supreme Tian Yi exchanged a glance upon hearing this, before nodding solemnly. The Great Catastrophe War was related to the survival of the universe. If it was not for the fact that the Divine Life Palace had to send people to guard it, they would have wanted to go to the off-world battlefield. All right, I'll take my leave then. Supreme Shuebo's expression was grave. He took a step forward and transformed into a streak of light that shot into the sky. Before he could rush out, an ancient, vast, and gentle force gently dragged him down. The next moment, an aged voice rang in their ears. Shuebo, you stay in the Divine Life Palace. I'll go. Supreme Shuebo, Supreme Junfu, and Supreme Tian Yi were momentarily stunned when they heard this voice. However, they were soon overjoyed and turned around to look. Lord Gai Fu, Lord Gai Fu, Supreme Shuebo, Supreme Junfu, and Supreme Tianyi all turned their heads to look. An old man with age spots all over his face and turbid eyes walked out of the Divine Life Palace. After sleeping for hundreds of thousands of years, the aura of decay on Supreme Artist Gai Fu's body had become even stronger. His entire body was shriveled. His eyes were sunken, and he was emaciated. However, his appearance was like a stabilizing force that instantly calmed the anxious Supreme Shuebo and the other two. From the moment they joined the Divine Life Palace, Supreme Master Gai Fu had actually been with them for far longer than the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace. In their hearts, they had long since regarded Supreme Gai Fu as their elder. Lord Gai Fu, Supreme Shuebo and the others hurriedly walked over and reached out to support Supreme Gai Fu, who was in his last years. When Supreme Artist Gai Fu saw this, he could not help but smile and wave his hand, saying, I'm not old enough to need you to help me. Supreme Shuebo and the others sniffed upon hearing this. In the past, Supreme Gai Fu was full of mettle. In the end, he fought several ancient Six-Scar Void Masters during the Great Catastrophe War, causing him to be seriously injured and his life source to be destroyed. If he had gone into secluded meditation to recuperate, his injuries would have been completely healed, but the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had sent word that he had no choice but to suppress his injuries and step out of the Divine Life Palace to stand guard over it for 100,000 chaos cycles, making sure that no one would ever be able to harm it. In the end, when the six forces besieged the Divine Life Palace, he fought the Dragon Clan alone for Jian Wushuang and fell into a deep sleep. It could be said that the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace had founded the Divine Life Palace. But the person who had truly made the Divine Life Palace stand tall and unshaken was Supreme Gai Fu. Supreme Gai Fu had given up his entire life for the Divine Life Palace. The entire Divine Life Palace was in awe. Where's Jian Wushuang? Supreme Gai Fu asked with a smile. Lord Gai Fu, Jian Wushuang went to the off-world battlefield nearly 10,000 years ago. Supreme Shuebo replied. Oh? Weren't only supreme experts allowed to go to the off-world battlefields? This little fellow has broken through to the supreme realm. Supreme Gai Fu's eyebrows twitched as he asked in surprise. That's right. Jian Wushuang broke through to the supreme realm after the Universe Great Clan gathering. He defeated the 6 forces all by himself. Apart from the Dragon Clan and Cosmos Temple, which still exist, the Great Sun Divine Kingdom and other superpowers have all been destroyed. The Shui Bo Supreme nodded. When he mentioned Jian Wushuang, he could not help but look proud. He had brought Jian Wushuang into the Divine Life Palace. He was proud of Jian Wushuang's achievements. Supreme Gai Fu was silent for a moment. After a long time, he said heavily, "All right." It was a simple word, but it was filled with gratification and acknowledgement of Jian Wushuang. After saying that, Supreme Gai Fu stood with his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky. He smiled and said to himself, "In this case, I can be completely at ease. As long as we survive this great catastrophe, the Divine Life Palace will definitely shine and shine under Jian Wushuang's leadership in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, no one noticed that a look of determination to die had already flashed across Supreme Gai Fu's eyes. He understood his body the best. It had long reached the point of no return. Now, he was only willing to use his body to make the most brilliant strike for the divine power universe. Bang! Bang! With a single step, Supreme Gai Fu soared into the sky and shot toward the off-world battlefield. Supreme Shui Bo, Supreme Jun Fu, and the others exchanged glances and sighed. At the same time, in the glacial forbidden land of the divine power universe. This was the place where the Overlord Patriarch was. In the glacial forbidden land under 100,000 feet glacier, a brawny, bare-chested old man exuded an air of authority and dominance as he sat cross-legged. He was like a fireball in a furnace. The extremely cold glaciers could not get close to him at all. The bone-piercing cold air was melted by this old man as soon as it came over. Those otherverse trash are starting to cause trouble again. Huh. A low voice came out of the mouth of the Overlord Patriarch. Then, he slowly opened his eyes, and an extremely hot golden light burst out from his eyes. Back then, that void emissary managed to escape from me. This time, he won't be able to escape. His shoulder shook slightly. Crack, crack. In an instant, the glacier, which was tens of thousands of feet tall, started to crack like a glass mirror that had fallen to its death. Then, it shattered with a loud bang. A figure as hot as the sun rose into the sky and flew toward the battlefield. In a remote star field on a planet where mortals lived, the streets were bustling with noise and countless mortals were walking around. At the entrance of an inn, an old beggar in tattered clothes, one could vaguely see that he was wearing a starry Taoist robe, was leaning against the door frame of the inn. He held a wine gourd covered in dust in his hand and raised his head to drink. He muttered in a half-drunk and half-awake voice, "I have dreamed for 3,000 years, and I have gained countless epiphanies." The passers-by all looked at the crazy alcoholic with disgust. Even the young children ran away when they smelled the alcohol on the old beggar. "Hey, you crazy alcoholic old beggar. If you want to lie down, go somewhere else. Don't block our business." The inn's waiter covered his nose and kicked the old beggar in disgust. "Hee, I'll go now." The old beggar opened his hazy and drunk eyes and glanced at the waiter. He grinned, revealing his mouth that was missing a front tooth. Then he took a step forward and flew up to the sky. The surrounding passers-by and the disdainful waiter were all stunned. "It's a god." Immediately, countless people knelt down and kowtowed. The old beggar took a second step forward. Today, he had once again entered the unparalleled supreme stage. At the center of the universe, a sword mountain was suspended in the air. At the entrance of the sword mountain, there was a plaque with 4 big words written on it. Starry Sky Sword Sect. On this day, 13 flying swords came out of the mountain and sailed into the starry sky like a small boat. On this flying swords, 13 experts' clothes fluttered in the wind, showing the elegance of sword immortals. Standing on the first flying sword with her hands behind her back was a tall woman in red sleeveless silk armor. Her hair was tied up with a wooden hairpin in it, and she had a cold expression. She was Wu Jianxian, the #1 swordsman in the world. The sword chi filled the sky, and the boundless starry sky seemed to be split into two. Similar scenes were happening in the divine power universe. On this day, whether it was Supreme Gai Fu who had just woken up from a deep sleep, or the old beggar who had looked at the world in a drunken state, or the #1 person in the world who had come out of the heavenly mountain and dominated the starry sky, Supreme Wu Jianxian, their destination was the same place. That was the off-world battlefield. On this day, the universe was in turmoil. In the billions of miles of the universe, in the major star fields, from time to time, there would be legends of immortals appearing. These so-called immortals did not like to form groups or factions. Instead, they traveled alone in the universe, measuring the earth with their feet and comprehending the mortal heart with their divine heart. They usually did not care about anything in the universe. But now, for the safety of the universe, they all revealed their true bodies and rushed to the off-world battlefield. The Overlord Patriarch, White Ape, the Old Beggar, Immortal Hulu, Emperor Ling Tian, Xing Do Patriarch, the ancient powers that had once ruled over the universe were all revived and walked out of the universe toward the off-world battlefield. Other than that, the three overlords of the universe, the Dragon race, the Qilin race, and the Phoenix race, also had powerful beings walking out from their ancestral lands. At the beginning of the universe, when the chaos was just started, the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin fought for the position of the overlord of the universe and suffered heavy casualties. Not long after that, the Great Catastrophe War broke out. The ancestral dragon of the Dragon clan who won the great battle between the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin also died in the Great Catastrophe War. Following that, mighty figures from the Phoenix and Qilin clans also died in the Great Catastrophe. The Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans had completely declined. They each found a forbidden land to cultivate in seclusion and recuperate. Thus, Cosmos God rose to power and won the battle of the Great Catastrophe, becoming true master of the universe. Now that the Great Catastrophe War started again, even if the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin races did not want to contribute, they could only pinch their noses and force a few of their sleeping patriarchs to rush to the off-world battlefield under the call of Cosmos God. Countless ordinary cultivators who did not know the inside story felt a knot in their hearts even though they did not know what had happened. The sky was about to change. This was a brilliant era that had never been seen before. And at this moment, in the void universe, there were also countless almighties who had awakened. However, they did not rush to the void forbidden land immediately like the divine power universe. Instead, they waited quietly for the void gods to dispatch them. At the same time, in the god refining sect in the sect master's bedroom, Jian Wushuang and Ban Shan sat cross-legged. Jian Wushuang, what should we do next? Elder Ban Shan asked worriedly. He had stayed in the void universe for tens of thousands of chaos cycles, so he knew exactly how powerful it was. The top fighting power of the void universe was not much more than that of the divine power universe in terms of numbers, but in terms of actual fighting power, it was stronger than the divine power universe. For example, Snake God who dominated the universe when the void god was asleep was not much weaker than the void god. Moreover, the void universe still had the devourers, a special existence. Bide our time and wait for the next order. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm as he spoke. When Elder Ban Shan heard this, he could not help but be taken aback. He said in surprise, "We're just not doing anything?" "That's right. A little impatience will mess up the overall situation." Jian Wushuang nodded. Before the second great catastrophe completely erupted, his heart was filled with uneasiness. However, when the great catastrophe truly broke out, Jian Wushuang found that his state of mind had calmed down. There was a saying among mortals, "Two tigers cannot live on the same mountain." Where there was Jianghu, there would be fighting and killing. This sentence was equally appropriate in the universe. From the moment the channel between the two universes was opened, it was destined that only one side would emerge victorious. "All right." Ban Shan bitterly smiled and shook his head. At the same time, he looked at Jian Wushuang's calm face and could not help but feel emotional. Jian Wushuang was so young, but his ability to remain calm was so profound that he could still maintain his rationality and calm when war broke out. This made him feel inferior. Jian Wushuang, I'll take my leave first. If anything happens, let me know immediately. I'll cultivate in seclusion for a while, Ban Shan said after taking a deep breath. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded. He knew that Ban Shan was not calm. If he was not calm, he would not be able to think rationally. Once he could not think rationally, he would reveal his flaws sooner or later. Thus, it was the best choice for Ban Shan to go into seclusion. After Ban Shan left, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged on his seat and his eyes flickered. He knew that all he had to do now was to wait. This morning, he had already spoken to Cosmos God. Cosmos God told him that the battle between the two universes could not be considered a direct confrontation yet. They were still in the process of probing and rubbing against each other. Cosmos God did not intend to reveal his strength and directly engage in a life-and-death battle with the Void Universe. After that, Jian Wushuang would take the net. After pondering for a while, Jian Wushuang received a message from Luo Ming, the chief of the Crimson Whale Gang. Young Master. Luo Ming's respectful voice came. He had been paying attention to the Void Forbidden Land and had a rough idea of the battle. From this, Jian Wushuang's identity was naturally revealed. However, even though he understood this, he did not point it out. From the moment Jian Wushuang planted the restriction in his life source, he knew that his life no longer belonged to the universe or even himself. It only belonged to one person, Jian Wushuang. He would be the fiercest dog under Jian Wushuang, and he would only serve Jian Wushuang. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded and said, Luo Ming, from now on, split up all Crimson Whale Gang members and withdraw from the various top factions and the Void Forbidden Land. We don't want Crimson Whale Gang to exist either. Only the core members who have set up the restriction will be allowed to go underground and change their name. Now that the Great Catastrophe War had begun, Jian Wushuang had to find a way to hide all his secrets at this critical moment. We're dispersing. Luo Ming was startled when he heard this, but he nodded without hesitation and replied, Young Master, I understand. If you want to change the name, what should we call ourselves? Jian Wushuang thought about it. Luo Ming and the others were acting as his eyes and ears in the Void Universe. Since that was the case, how about this? You guys will call yourselves Left Ear in the future. Serve me for 10 million years. After 10 million years, I will remove the restriction and return you your freedom. Jian Wushuang finished his words indifferently. 10 million years later, the war between the two universes would have ended. At that time, it would not be a problem to return their freedom. All right. Luo Ming clenched his fists, his heart slightly excited. Okay. I'll contact you again if there's anything. Jian Wushuang cut off communication with Luo Ming and walked out of the sect master's hall. He came to the railing where he could overlook the entire God-refining sect. The sky turned dark and heavy snow fell from the sky, covering the God-refining sect in white. A snowflake fell on Jian Wushuang's shoulder. Jian Wushuang tightened his sect master's cloak and looked at the dark sky. He muttered to himself, The middle of winter has arrived, and the eternal night is coming. Time flew by and 3 days passed. To cultivators, 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. However, to the current Void Universe and Divine Power Universe, it was extremely slow. Although there were various top-notch existences in the Divine Power Universe that had gone to the off-world battlefield to help Cosmos Gods, Cosmos Gods did not choose to engage in a decisive battle with the Void Universe. Instead, they chose to retreat in a roundabout way. Meanwhile, the Void Universe was closing in step by step, compressing the living space of Cosmos God and the others. At the same time, in the battlefield outside the Divine Power Universe, the Void Warriors of the Void Universe had already set up camp and completely occupied it. In a tent in the middle of the camp, Void God, who was surrounded by endless black mist, sat on a large chair. On his two sides were the left and right Void emissaries, and below him were the 34 Void Masters. They were discussing their next battle plan. A Void Master who had countless tentacles quickly walked into the tent and knelt down in front of Void God. He said, Void God Lord, The people from the divine power universe still haven't started a direct battle with us. Instead, they retreated after one attack and kept shrinking their defense line. Void God sat on the main seat and did not speak. Instead, he raised his head and narrowed his eyes, making it impossible for others to understand what he was thinking. The emissary of the right standing next to him was a skinny old man wearing a shaman's feathered hat. He said softly, "Void God Lord, there must be something wrong if things are abnormal. This divine power universe isn't fighting us head-on. Instead, it keeps retreating. I'm afraid there's some scheme." As soon as he said this, the other Void Masters also frowned and said, "That's right, Void God Lord. This divine power universe is obviously setting a trap to lure us in. I think they've set up an ambush not far ahead." In the main camp, there was a lot of discussion. Void God looked at them indifferently, and a magical voice came out of his mouth. "So what if there's an ambush? So what if they have schemes? One man can overcome 10. After saying that, he shook his head and waved his hand. "Pass down the order. If you see anyone from the divine power universe, don't stay back to test them. Kill them directly. If they don't want to fight with us, we'll fight them. The initiative has never been in their hands, but in our hands." His words were plain, but his words were filled with a terrifying domineering aura that showed that he did not respect the enemy at all. "No matter how many schemes and plots you have, I'll take you down by force." Overbearing suppression. Within the divine power universe, the Void Warriors all boarded the Dragon Bone ship and slowly retreated. Cosmos God stood on the deck of a Dragon Bone ship with his hands behind his back. He raised his head and looked at the starry sky in the distance. There was a connection between great beings. He could sense that 100,000 Void eras ago, the being in the Void universe was not far from him, looking at him through the air. Void God, his old enemy. Lord Cosmos God. The people from the Void universe seem to have sensed that we are keeping them in check. They have not been attacking rashly in the recent few attacks. The leader of Team 8, Supreme Sui Shi, who was famous in the universe for her divine ability 1 Chi for 3 purities, stood beside Cosmos God and said softly. His eyes were filled with worry. Just as the Void God had said, their divine power universe had set up countless killing formations to kill immortals and gods in their base camp tens of thousands of miles away from the off-world battlefield. Each of the killing formations was not only powerful, but Cosmos God had also made use of the list that Jian Wushuang had given him. Each killing formation had a specific attribute that could restrain the enemy. Once the people of the Void universe fell into the trap, what awaited them would be a storm of thunderous attacks. "It's okay. I know Void God. He always values power above all else. He's invincible. Don't worry. He won't back down. On the contrary, he'll increase his attack." Cosmos God chuckled. This was an old enemy of his that he had fought for 100,000 chaos cycles. Thus, Cosmos God was extremely familiar with the nature of Void God. Moreover, to Cosmos God, the countless killing formations were merely a pretense to attract their attention. The real killing move was Jian Wushuang. However, Cosmos God did not tell anyone about these plans. The captain of Team 8, Sui Shi, took a deep breath and said, "All right, I hope so." 3 days later, Lord Cosmos God, it's just as you expected. The Void Warriors of the Void universe have launched a fierce attack. The captain of Team 8, Sui Shi, rushed over and said excitedly. With the countless killing formations, the current divine power universe was not afraid of the Void universe becoming reckless. It was afraid of the Void universe becoming cautious. Now that the Void universe had launched a fierce attack and was in hot pursuit of them, they had fallen into their trap. "All right, don't fight with them. Drag them into the killing array." Cosmos God nodded and waved Supreme Sui Shi away. After that, he started to communicate with Jian Wushuang. Within the God-refining sect, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged and was cultivating. Jian Wushuang. Cosmos God's words reverberated in Jian Wushuang's mind. Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and there was a flash of light in his eyes. "Lord Cosmos God, are you going to start the plan?" "That's right. Jian Wushuang, You can go to the Void Forbidden Land now and set up the Fengtian flag. Cosmos God nodded. He then took in a deep breath and his expression turned solemn. Jian Wushuang, your task is of utmost importance. You must succeed. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded and a determined look flashed in his eyes. Even if he died 9 times, he would not regret it. Finally, Cosmos God paused for a moment before his tone turned gentler. He said deeply, Jian Wushuang, come back alive after this. I'll wait for you in the universe. Jian Wushuang smiled and said, don't worry, I'll come back alive. After that, Jian Wushuang hung up the communication with Cosmos God. The sect master's sleeping chamber fell silent. Jian Wushuang stood up and walked out of the sect master's hall with a calm look in his eyes. The slightly cold wind ruffled Jian Wushuang's black hair. The wind rises. Jian Wushuang looked up at the sky and muttered to himself. The next moment, Jian Wushuang took a step forward and was already outside the star field where the God-refining sect was located. Standing in the starry sky, Jian Wushuang had already changed into a loose black robe. He lowered his head and looked at the God-refining sect. He understood that he would probably never return here again. Goodbye. Shaking his head, Jian Wushuang pulled up the wide hood of his black robe and pulled down the edge of the hood, revealing only his chin. Bang! Jian Wushuang's body turned into a bolt of lightning and shot toward the Void Forbidden Land. In the vast universe, a figure was shooting toward the Void Forbidden Land. The God-refining sect was not far from the Void Forbidden Land. Hence, it did not take long for Jian Wushuang to arrive at his destination. When he arrived at the Void Forbidden Land, the defense was much tighter than before. There were Scar-level Void Masters everywhere, guarding the entrances. The ranks of these Void Masters were not high. Most of them only had 2 or 3 scars. They had been selected by the elders of the top sects and had not participated in the Great Catastrophe War. They were responsible for guarding the Void Forbidden Land. You at the front. Who are you? A middle-aged man with bright eyes and a halo of the Great Path behind him looked at Jian Wushuang. Your Excellency, I'm Luo Ming. Jian Wushuang smiled and pushed down his hood, revealing a face that was exactly the same as Luo Ming's. At the same time, a faint fluorescent light streaked across Cosmos God's token on his waist, causing his aura to become indiscernible. Luo Ming. The middle-aged man who was sitting cross-legged and guarding the entrance raised his eyebrows. He had heard of the name Luo Ming before. He was the notorious leader of Crimson Whale Gang. He had always made a living by robbing others. Although he was not weak, he did not have a good reputation in the universe. He often bullied the weak and feared the strong, committing all sorts of evil deeds. As a result, not many people thought highly of him. In the eyes of this middle-aged man, Luo Ming was just an insignificant character. What was this guy doing here? Shaking his head, the middle-aged man revealed a mocking smile and said, Luo Ming, what are you doing here instead of staying in your Crimson Whale Gang? There's no one here that you can rob. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang pretended to be angry and glared at him. He grunted, What nonsense are you talking about? Could it be that, in your impression, I only know how to do those shady business? Ha ha ha. Isn't that so? The middle-aged man laughed mischievously, and the mocking look on his face became even more obvious. All right, Luo Ming, this is not a place you should be. Go back to where you came from. The middle-aged man waved his hand and said impatiently, trying to send Jian Wushuang away. Get lost. Who do you think you are? Does your family own this Void Forbidden Land? You think I'll leave just because you told me to? Jian Wushuang glared at the middle-aged man and said fiercely. Long before he entered the Void Forbidden Land, Jian Wushuang had already planned to impersonate Luo Ming. Luo Ming was quite well known in the Void universe. But because of his status, he didn't have many close friends. In addition, the impression that Luo Ming gave to the public was that he was a devil incarnate. Even if he did something out of line, it was reasonable in everyone's eyes, which was in line with his character. These were all the labels on Luo Ming. Hence, this was the most suitable identity for Jian Wushuang to enter the Void Forbidden Land. As for the risk of forcing his way through, Jian Wushuang did not want to do so unless it was the last moment. You really have a foul mouth. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly when he heard this, and a cold look appeared in his eyes. I want you to leave. This is not a place you should be. Don't you understand? The middle-aged man stood up as he spoke. The powerful pressure of a fourth-level Void Master spread out from his body. Although his cultivation realm was the same as Luo Ming, he was confident that Luo Ming could not compare to him since he was born in the main sect. If Luo Ming dared to talk back to him, he would not mind teaching this notorious Crimson Whale Gang's first master a good lesson. What's wrong? You want to fight? Jian Wushuang sneered and looked at the middle-aged man without fear. With the identity of Luo Ming, Jian Wushuang was not worried at all that his seemingly arrogant performance would arouse any suspicion. You're looking for death. The middle-aged man's eyes flashed coldly, and he said, Luo Ming, you're usually doing evil things. It's fine if you don't cause any big trouble, but now you actually dare to provoke me. Do you think that I am one of those soft persimmons you can pinch at will? Whoosh! A black bone blade was pulled out from the middle-aged man's body. A surge of void power exploded from his hand. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank slightly, but his expression did not change. He took a step forward and looked straight at the middle-aged man. Their gazes collided in the air, creating countless invisible sparks. A pin against an on. Just as the two of them were about to fight, an unexpected voice suddenly came from the distance. Luo Ming? What are you doing here? Then he saw a red-robed elder. After seeing Jian Wushuang, he was stunned at first. Then his face lit up with joy and he quickly came to greet him. Hey Void Master He Dao, Luo Ming, why are you two fighting? When the red-robed old man approached, he saw that the atmosphere between Jian Wushuang and the middle-aged man was not right. He immediately thought to himself, oh no! He and Luo Ming could be considered as good friends, and he knew Luo Ming's temperament the best. With a bitter smile, the red-robed old man immediately became the peacemaker. The middle-aged man obviously knew the red-robed old man. He snorted coldly and said with an ugly expression, Hong Fo, you can ask this person yourself. He kept asking me to get lost. He spoke rudely. I'm already being kind by not killing him. Jian Wushuang's mind was racing. The red-robed elder was one of the few good friends the real Luo Ming had in the universe. Later on, he had to find an opportunity to ask Luo Ming about the situation of this red-robed old man. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would be exposed. Although he had many thoughts in his mind, Jian Wushuang glared at him and pretended to be angry. Hong Fo, this guy asked me to leave first. He's just a gatekeeper. Does he really think he's Lord Void God? We're all in the same cultivation realm. What right does he have to order me around? Luo Ming, who are you calling a gatekeeper? I'm guarding the last line of defense for Lord Void God. Don't talk nonsense. The middle-aged man's face was filled with anger again. You're really good at putting gold on your face. Jian Wushuang sneered in disdain and retorted. In just a few words, Jian Wushuang and the middle-aged man were about to fight again. Seeing this, the red-robed elder felt a headache. He could not help but stop Jian Wushuang, who was still talking, and said with a bitter smile, All right, can you all give me some face and speak less? The red-robed old man saw that the two of them had suppressed their anger and stopped. He could not help but let out a sigh of relief. He turned to Jian Wushuang and asked, By the way, Luo Ming, why did you suddenly come here? He remembered that Luo Ming did not know about the Great Catastrophe War. The Great Catastrophe War. In the Divine Power universe, it was a secret that only spread among the top-tier powers, and it was the same in the Void universe. Logically speaking, with Luo Ming's strength, he was qualified to know about the Great Catastrophe. However, Luo Ming's social relations were too poor and he had always been at odds with the top sects who knew about the news. Therefore, no one would naturally tell him. The red-robed elder knew this. Therefore, he was also quite curious about how Luo Ming knew about the Great Catastrophe War. Of course, Jian Wushuang already had an answer to this. He raised his eyebrows and deliberately put on a nonchalant look. He pursed his lips and said, What's wrong? You're the only ones allowed to know? There are many men in Crimson Whale Gang who have informed me of this matter long ago. The red-robed old man could not help but nod with a bitter smile. Although Crimson Whale Gang consisted of a bunch of small fry with few capable of taking on major responsibilities, they did have many members. It was not difficult for them to gather information. Luo Ming, I haven't seen you for tens of millions of years, but you still speak with a sharp tongue, the red-robed old man said with a sigh. Before Jian Wushuang could answer, the middle-aged man, Voidmaster He Dao, sneered and replied, "So what if you know? What do you want to do now that you know? Do you really think you'll be able to participate in the great catastrophe?" Jian Wushuang also sneered and replied, "It's not up to you to decide whether I will participate in the battle or not. I think you're a busybody." You! Hearing this, He Dao Venerable was furious. The red-robed old man saw that the two of them were about to quarrel again. So he quickly put his hand on his forehead and said, "All right, everyone, be quiet." Jian Wushuang and Master He Dao looked at each other, then snorted and stopped talking. Taking a deep breath, the red-robed old man said, "Now is the time for our void universe to use people. Whether Luo Ming can participate in the battle is not up to the two of you, nor me. Wait here for a moment. Let me ask the master who is in charge of guarding the camp this time, Void Master Ba Huang." With that, the red-robed old man looked at the two of them and strode into the void forbidden land. After the red-robed elder left, Jian Wushuang relaxed a little. There was no need to continue acting. They just had to wait for the results. Therefore, he simply closed his eyes and looked down, turning a blind eye to Master He Dao's fiery gaze. The 87th crack in the void forbidden land was completely sealed. Among the densely packed palaces, there was a side hall with a few oil lamps. The first batch of main forces of the void universe had already followed Cosmos God and entered the divine power universe. However, they still sent an expert to suppress the main camp in case of emergency. A white-robed, middle-aged man was sitting cross-legged on a futon, cultivating quietly. Behind him, endless corpse chi appeared automatically, forming a scene of mountains of corpses and seas of blood. He was Void Master Ba Huang, the previous sect master of the God-refining sect, and the person in charge of guarding the camp this time. Lord Ba Huang, the red-robed old man quickly walked in and first respectfully called out softly. Although Void Master Ba Huang was ranked at the bottom of the 34 Void Masters because they were all powerful figures who had been revived from the ancient times, he still had great prestige for Void Warriors who had not entered the 6 scar level. "Hong Fo, what's the matter?" Void Master Ba Huang slowly opened his eyes and glanced at the red-robed elder. His tone was still polite. Although the red-robed old man had yet to enter the 6 scars, he had been in the 5 scars level for tens of thousands of void eras. In terms of cultivation time, he had been in this realm for even longer than the Void Master Ba Huang. However, on the path of cultivation, one's strength was not determined by cultivation time, but by experience. Lord Ba Huang, Crimson Whale Gang's Luo Ming, has come to join us. He wishes to contribute in this upcoming great catastrophe war, the red-robed old man said respectfully. Luo Ming? Is he the famous galactic pirate? Void Master Ba Huang raised an eyebrow. That's right, this is the person. Lord Ba Huang. I've known this Luo Ming for over 100 void eras. Although he's a little stubborn at times, he's not weak and he's not bad, the red-robed old man said. Is that so? Void Master Ba Huang rubbed his chin and smiled. Then Hong Fo, you can decide for yourself. Let him see if there are any other cracks that need to be guarded and send him to guard them. For Void Master Ba Huang, it was not a big deal to arrange for Luo Ming. Moreover, the red-robed elder had just said that he was on good terms with Luo Ming, so he would do him a favor. Yes. The red-robed old man was slightly overjoyed and cupped his hands in gratitude toward Ba Huang. In the dark of the void universe, countless people called this battle the Battle of Deification. This was because if they won this battle, they would receive a reward from Lord Void God. This was a rare opportunity. Luo Ming could be considered as one of his best friends. The red-robed old man naturally hoped that this good friend of his would also be able to get such an opportunity. After bidding farewell, the red-robed elder returned to the void forbidden land. Luo Ming, come with me. Lord Ba Huang has already agreed to your request. I'll bring you around to familiarize you with the void forbidden land first. After that, I'll find a place with weaker defense and let you take over, the red-robed old man said with a smile. Ha ha ha! Hong Fo, you are the best. Jian Wushuang laughed loudly and did not say any polite words. Instead, he reached out his hand and hit the red-robed elder's chest heavily. He triumphantly glared at the middle-aged man, whose face was terrifyingly dark. Then, he followed the red-robed elder and strode into the void forbidden land. A small man intoxicated by success. The middle-aged man grunted in anger and sat back down. He closed his eyes and began to cultivate. No one noticed that Jian Wushuang, who was following closely behind the red-robed elder, had a faint smile on his face. A small black flag slipped from his sleeve and inserted itself into the void. Then it disappeared without a trace. Only Jian Wushuang could sense that the nearby void had been suppressed by the Fengtian flag. With a thought from Jian Wushuang, the Fengtian flag could be fully activated and seal off everything, forming a forbidden land. Luo Ming, I'll bring you around the void forbidden land first. I'll also tell you what the situation is like in this great catastrophe war. The red-robed old man walked in front and said. Jian Wushuang had the same intention. When he heard the red-robed elder's words, he was moved and nodded. All right, he said. Time slowly passed. The red-robed elder led Jian Wushuang to familiarize himself with the void forbidden land. Luo Ming, there are void cracks everywhere in the void forbidden land, and the magnetic field is chaotic. Our void consciousness often can't spread out completely, or we may send some wrong information. Therefore, we need to measure inch by inch with our feet and get familiar with the terrain. The red-robed old man walked in front and said patiently. Jian Wushuang followed them without saying anything. He just kept looking at the void forbidden land. As the saying went, what you get from paper will always feel shallow. Although Jian Wushuang had the detailed map of the void forbidden land that Crimson Whale Gang had drawn for him and he had memorized it by heart, it was still somewhat different from seeing it with his own eyes. As he walked, Jian Wushuang secretly set up the Fengtian flag. A few hours later, they were halfway through the void forbidden land. There were not many Fengtian flags left in Jian Wushuang's hand. The entire void forbidden land was almost under his control. At this moment, the red-robed elder stopped in his tracks. Luo Ming, I think you only know the general idea of the Great Catastrophe War. You don't know the details. Today, I'll tell you about the Great Catastrophe War in detail. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang narrowed his eyes. To be honest, he did not know much about the Great Catastrophe War. He believed that there must be an important reason he did not know about as to why Void God had attacked the Divine Power universe like this. He attacked without caring about casualties. There must be other reasons besides pure ambition. Hurry up and tell me. Don't keep me in suspense, Jian Wushuang urged, which was in line with Luo Ming's character. Luo Ming, do you know about the existence of fate energy? The red-robed elder turned around and smiled at Jian Wushuang. Fate energy? Jian Wushuang was slightly stunned. It was the first time he had heard such a thing. That's right, it's fate energy. The red-robed old man nodded and replied, Luo Ming, you're still a 4-scar void master, and you don't have a deep understanding of fate. When you reach the 5-scar level, you'll realize the importance of fate and luck. After a pause, the red-robed old man continued, in the universe, it's not rare to have a 5-scar level void master. Generally speaking, as long as you break through to the scar level and don't die halfway, after a long period of cultivation, you can reach the 5-scar level void master as long as you're not too weak. However, although the 5-scar void master and the 6-scar void master seemed to be just a small difference, the actual difference was like heaven and earth. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was a natural chasm between them. To break through to the level of 6-scar void master, not only do you need top talent, comprehension, and the opportunity of seizing heaven and earth, but there is also the most crucial factor, which is luck. It's fate. All 6-scar void masters are considered the sons of the heavenly law. Their own fate energy is already connected to this universe. Therefore, since ancient times, almost no one has been able to defeat a 6-scar Void Master without entering being 6-scar level themselves. The red-robed old man's eyes flickered. Then he sighed and said, I've been a 5-scar Void Master for tens of thousands of Void eras. In terms of cultivation years, many 6-scar Void Masters are still behind me. However, on the path of cultivation, the one who has achieved success is the teacher. I have cultivated for so long, but I am still inferior to them. I am truly ashamed. Jian Wushuang did not answer but continued to think about the word, fate energy, that the red-robed elder had mentioned. It was not only difficult for a 5-scar Void Master to break through to the 6-scar level in the Void universe. In the Divine Power universe, there was a world of difference between a half-invincible Supreme and an invincible Supreme. There were many top-notch Supreme experts and half-invincible Supreme experts in the universe, but there were pitifully few invincible Supreme experts. People like Supreme Bloodwave and Supreme Junfu were considered extremely talented in the universe, but there was still a barrier before they could break through to become an invincible Supreme. He was probably also lacking the word fate or luck. Luo Ming, the importance of the word luck is not limited to this. For us, although we need luck or fate to break through from the 5-scar level Void Master to the 6-scar level Void Master, throughout the ages, there have been people who have broken through by force. However, it is absolutely impossible for a 6-scar Void Master to take that crucial step without luck. The level above the 6-scar Void Master? Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was stunned and his eyes flickered. If he did not guess wrong, Void God or Cosmos God should be at that level. If that were the case, it would explain why the 6-scar Void Masters, ancient existences born from the chaos, spared no effort in attacking the Divine Power universe. It was probably because a universe had limited fate energy. If a universe's fate energy was divided into 10 portions and a Void God already had 7 portions, the only way for others to reach the Void God level was to attack another universe. What is that step called? Jian Wushuang asked. This is not something I can come into contact with. I will only understand the specific situation after I have broken through to the 6-scar level. The red-robed old man shook his head and said, Let's go. I'll take you to the place you're guarding. All right. Jian Wushuang nodded and did not ask further. After 2 hours, a huge basin appeared in front of Jian Wushuang. Luo Ming, you'll be in charge of guarding this place, the red-robed old man said. After a pause, the red-robed elder patted Jian Wushuang's shoulder and said with a smile, Usually, nothing major will happen. You just need to wait here for Void God to return in triumph and then receive the credit. After giving a few more instructions, the red-robed old man left. Jian Wushuang looked around and sat down with his legs crossed. A Fengtian flag slid down from his sleeve and inserted itself into the void. Then it disappeared. Open! Jian Wushuang shouted, and his dark golden eyes suddenly flickered with countless lights. An invisible map appeared in his eyes. This map was the Void Forbidden Land. The Void Forbidden Land was almost full of Fengtian flags. With just a thought, Jian Wushuang could instantly activate the formation and seal the Void Forbidden Land. There's still one more place to go before the Fengtian formation is complete. Jian Wushuang looked at the 87th crack and muttered to himself, I have to hurry up and plant the Fengtian flag in the 87th crack, he muttered. The next day, Jian Wushuang stood up, as if he was tired of the boring guarding work, and swaggered around. Many of the guards were surprised at first, but when they knew it was Luo Ming, they snorted and said nothing. In their eyes, Luo Ming was just a country bumpkin who did not know how to follow the rules, so it was normal for him to do this. After wandering around for a while, Jian Wushuang saw that the time was right. He immediately walked toward the 87th crack. 3 Fengtian flags appeared in his hands. Within the Void Forbidden Land, in a loft, the red-robed old man held the railing with both hands and listened to the report from the servants about Luo Ming wandering around. He could not help but shake his head and said, This old friend of mine has a really active personality. I knew he wouldn't be so content. As expected, he can't sit still after only 1 or 2 days of peace. After a pause, the red-robed old man turned around and asked, Where's Luo Ming now? Lord Hong Fo, Luo Ming should be heading to the 87th crack now. The servant cupped his hands and said, Yes. The red-robed old man nodded. He pondered for a while before saying, This place is different from other places. I'd better go and see him. I don't want to cause any trouble. As soon as he finished speaking, the red-robed old man took a step forward and walked toward the 87th crack. The 87th crack was more heavily guarded than the other places. From a distance, Jian Wushuang saw a huge building that looked like a beehive floating in the air. Behind the building, there was a crack about 30 meters wide that was constantly twisting. This crack was the 87th crack, the bridge that connected the Void Universe and the Divine Power Universe. This was the most crucial part of sealing the Void Forbidden Land and cutting off the advanced army in the Divine Power Universe. That was why Jian Wushuang had to plant 3 Fengtian flags there. Whoosh! The first Fengtian flag slid down from Jian Wushuang's hand and disappeared in the void. Then Jian Wushuang walked toward the 87th crack. Halt! Before he got close, he saw 2 long-necked weirdos in strange robes blocking his way. Jian Wushuang glanced at them, scratched his head, and said casually, Hey, my 2 brothers. I'm in charge of guarding the Void Forbidden Land. Let me go in and take a look. The 2 long-necked eccentrics looked at each other and frowned. Without Lord Ba Huang's summons, you are not allowed to enter this place. Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank slightly. Ba Huang. Was Void Master Ba Huang the person in charge of guarding this Void Forbidden Land? Jian Wushuang's mind was racing, but he muttered, Then why don't you just go and inform Lord Ba Huang? The 2 long-necked strongmen said, Lord Ba Huang is currently speaking with Lord Void God. He will not accept any reporting now. Quickly return to the place you're guarding. Is that so? Jian Wushuang lowered his head. He had just spoken to Cosmos God, and Cosmos God had told him that the war between the Divine Power Universe and the Void Universe had already broken out. Cutting off their escape route could not be delayed. It seems like I can only use force, Jian Wushuang muttered to himself. The next moment, bang! Jian Wushuang took a step forward. Before the 2 long-necked monsters could react, he had already turned into a flowing light and rushed toward the 87th crack. How audacious! Impudent! The 2 long-necked monsters came back to their senses and immediately flew into a rage. They activated their void power and chased after Jian Wushuang. Although the 2 long-necked monsters were only in charge of guarding the place, they were actually 2 Scar Void Masters after unleashing their cultivation. Their necks suddenly stretched like rubber and turned into giant pythons. Then they wrapped around Jian Wushuang. Get lost! Jian Wushuang's eyes glowed, and he reached out his hands to grab the necks of the 2 long-necked monsters. In his hands, countless wind and lightning surged. Jian Wushuang's eyes glowed with a cold light. He twisted his hands and tied a knot on the 2 long-necked monsters' rubber-like necks. Then he slapped them away. Men! Someone has trespassed into the crack! The 2 long-necked monsters roared, and the entire Void Forbidden Land was filled with ear-piercing alarms. Jian Wushuang had already arrived in front of the crack in the void. A strong gust of wind came from the 87th void crack, and it revealed a familiar aura. The last 2 Fengtian flags slipped out of Jian Wushuang's hands and into the crack in the void. In an instant, all the Fengtian flags sensed each other and became one, firmly sealing off the Void Forbidden Land. Then Jian Wushuang started to communicate with Cosmos God. Lord Cosmos God, the Fengtian flags have been placed in place. We can activate the formation at any time, some distance away from the 87th void crack. The red-robed old man was approaching, but before he could reach the 87th crack, a sharp alarm suddenly exploded in the sky. What's the situation? The red-robed old man's expression changed. He instantly thought of the servant who had just reported to him that Luo Ming had gone to the 87th rift. Instantly, his eyelids twitched, and a bad feeling welled up in his heart. Could it be that Luo Ming, that guy, did something? Whoosh! Instantly, the red-robed old man took a step forward, and his speed increased. Beehive Palace Complex. Void Master Ba Huang was communicating with Void God. All of a sudden, an ear-piercing alarm sounded. What? Void Master Ba Huang frowned and apologized to Void God. He cut off the communication and said, Men, what's happening outside? A servant ran in a hurry, knelt down and said, Lord Ba Huang, someone is trying to force his way into the 87th crack. What? Ba Huang's face changed and his expression instantly turned dark. He asked coldly, Who is the one who broke through the 87th crack? Lord Ba Huang. It's Luo Ming from Crimson Whale Gang. Luo Ming? He's so bold. Void Master Ba Huang snorted and strode out of the tent toward the crack. At the entrance of the 87th void crack, Jian Wushuang, activate the Fengtian flag immediately, Cosmos God said in a deep voice. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded and took a deep breath. 99 Fengtian flags appeared in his eyes. Activate. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang spat out a word. The sky and earth suddenly changed color. Countless gusts of wind whistled. The entire void forbidden land let out a muffled roar as if there was an earthquake. The earth began to shake violently. Dust flew up as palm-sized cracks spread out. Pow! Bolts of lightning struck down like thunder on a clear day, and all the void energy in the void forbidden land was quickly sucked away by an invisible force. Countless black chains appeared out of thin air and sealed the area within 100,000 feet. What's going on? The red-robed elder and Void Master Ba Huang, who had just arrived at the crack, were both shocked. They looked up at the crack in the void and saw Jian Wushuang, who was still calm. Luo Ming, what have you done? Quickly stop. Are you looking for death? The red-robed elder looked at Jian Wushuang in shock and anger. At the same time, he felt a sense of uneasiness. For some reason, he suddenly felt a sense of unfamiliarity when he looked at the calm Jian Wushuang. Bang! Bang! Just as the red-robed elder was about to scold Jian Wushuang, Void Master Ba Huang had already turned into a streak of flowing light and reached out to grab Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang looked back at the two of them and sneered. He did not waste time talking to them. The moment the Fengtian formation was activated, he stepped into the crack in the void. Die! Void Master Ba Huang's right hand reached out, but what he caught was only an afterimage. Instantly, Void Master Ba Huang's face turned extremely ugly. The red-robed old man rushed to the side, his expression shocked and angry. He had thought that, with Luo Ming's temperament, he would definitely cause some trouble, but he did not expect that he would cause such a great disaster. Looking at the ashen expression of Void Master Ba Huang, the red-robed elder said guiltily, Void Master Ba Huang, I'm sorry. I didn't know Luo Ming would do such a thing. Before he could finish, Void Master Ba Huang looked at him coldly and said, Hong Fo, can't you tell that this man is not Luo Ming? What? The red-robed old man was startled upon hearing this, and he immediately began to carefully recall. As he thought about it, he immediately thought of countless clues. When he showed Jian Wushuang around the void forbidden land, he talked to Jian Wushuang several times about the interesting things that happened between them, but Jian Wushuang brushed him off with vague words. At first, he did not think in this direction, so he did not notice anything. Now that he thought about it, he could not help but think that person must be afraid that he would be exposed. Then who is this person? The red-robed old man's heart skipped a beat as he asked. Humph, it doesn't matter who he is now. Hong Fo, you were the one who brought this person into the void forbidden land. Just wait for Lord Void God to come back and question you. Void Master Ba Huang snorted. In the past, given the red-robed elder's years of cultivation experience, he would still be rather polite. However, on such a major event, Void Master Ba Huang would naturally not act as usual. At the same time, he could not help but think of the image of the sky spider old monster. He had seen the black-robed man step into the crack in the void from the Divine Power Universe and enter the Void Universe. From the Divine Power Universe? Void Master Ba Huang squinted his eyes and muttered to himself. Immediately, Void Master Ba Huang stopped thinking and planned to contact Void God to inform him of the situation. However, just as he was about to send a message to Void God, his expression changed drastically. He realized that the communication line between him and Void God seemed to have been cut off by an invisible pair of scissors. He could not communicate with Void God at all. Something big is going to happen. Void Master Ba Huang's heart sank. Since he could not communicate with Void God, he tried to step into the crack in the void and enter the divine power universe to talk to Void God face to face. However, the moment he took that step, his heart turned cold. There seemed to be an invisible barrier in front of the 87th crack, which completely blocked the path to the divine power universe. The channel between the two universes had been sealed. Void Master Ba Huang understood what this meant. Since he could not go over, Void God and the others in the divine power universe would naturally not be able to return. This made Ba Huang feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar and his body shivered. Hong Fo, you should atone for your sins with your death. Void Master Ba Huang turned around and stared at the red-robed elder. Off-world battlefield. Jian Wushuang's body turned from transparent to solid and finally, he was completely revealed. Phew! Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief. With the successful activation of the Fengtian formation, the heavy stone that had been weighing on his heart was finally lifted. He looked around and saw that the off-world battlefield, which was originally an important place for militarists, was now empty. Only the shockwaves from the battle between the supreme martial artists and the Void Masters and countless broken limbs were left. Boom! 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 Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and looked forward. His dark golden eyes were bloodshot. His eyes pierced through thousands of miles of void space and saw the base camp of the divine power universe, where the two universes were fighting. It's my turn. Jian Wushuang twisted his neck and his eyes were burning with fighting intent. A strong desire to fight surged in his chest. Bang! The next moment, Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot and turned into a thunderbolt, shooting toward the battlefield. In the base camp of the divine power universe, the people from both universes finally started a real war here, clashing with their weapons. Countless killing formations were activated, killing the 34 Void Masters and the 2 Void Emissaries under Cosmic God, as well as the other Void Masters with 4 and 5 scars. The moon rose from the sea, the Celestial King descended from the 9 heavens, and the 9 stars were connected. One after another, strange phenomena appeared in the starry sky. The moment the two universes clashed, it was the time when they were at their most white and hot. The sound of killing filled the sky as countless spells collided. Each of them had the power to destroy stars and cut the Milky Way. In terms of overall advantage, although the divine power universe had the support of the killing formation, it still could not win against the void universe. The battle between the two sides was in a tit-for-tat situation. Not to mention the 9 teams under the command of Cosmos God and the battle between the Void Masters under the 6 scar level brought by Void God. The scene of the fight between the Invincible Supremes and the 6 scar Void Masters was extremely terrifying. The moment the battle started, Void God and Cosmos God had already split open space and entered another dimension to fight. Therefore, what really shocked people and played a decisive role on the battlefield was the battle between a 6 scar Void Master and an Invincible Supreme. The Overlord Patriarch White Ape, who had awakened from the glacier and unparalleled physical strength, was fighting against one of the strongest fighting powers under Void God, the Right Void Emissary, who was also the white-haired, burly old man that Jian Wushuang had met once in the God-refining sect. They watched as Overlord Patriarch punched out. It was as if he was pushing a blazing sun. It emitted a golden light that caused the void to explode. Countless air was drawn out and smashed onto the body of the Right Void Emissary. As for the emissary, he had also exploded with unbelievable and terrifying strength. The 2 thunder balls in his hands exploded and turned into a sea of thunder. It was as if the ancient thunder god who controlled the thunder laws of the world had descended to the world. Terrifying thunderbolts came crashing down one after another toward Overlord Patriarch like a violent storm. Every single bolt of lightning was more than enough to annihilate a half-invincible Supreme. At this moment, millions of tribulation lightning bolts of this level of power struck the body of the Overlord Patriarch. The power of this was simply indescribable. The crazy alcoholic old beggar, who had also dominated the ancient era and later hid in the mortal world, was fighting with the left void emissary. The crazy alcoholic pulled open the lid of the wine gourd, and a stream of primal chaos sunflower water gushed out like a river, submerging the left void emissary, who looked like a mantis. Weak, 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 weak. Too weak. Right emissary, it seems you haven't made any progress in the past 100,000 chaos cycles. The Overlord Patriarch swallowed the tribulation lightning and went head-to-head with the lightning. Each punch was enough to blow up hundreds of suns, and the force was extremely heavy and overbearing. I'll get drunk 36,000 times, and I'll get rid of eternal sorrow with you. The crazy alcoholic, who looked like an old beggar, turned the entire galaxy into his water domain. The sound of waves rose. Battles of such nature were constantly taking place in the starry sky. Whether it was the unrivaled supremacy of the divine power universe or the six-scar void master of the void universe, each of them was a top figure who had led and dominated an era. At this moment, these ancient powerhouses had all woken up from their long sleep, and their fight was extremely loud. Some of them shattered the stars and moons with a finger, some of them shattered the Milky Way with a stomp, and some of them transformed into 100 million feet tall figure and swallowed the starry sky in one gulp. The shock waves from their battle seemed to have destroyed countless great worlds. Chaos was about to boil and restart. Heaven and earth were about to crack and shatter. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was the end of the world. The overlords of the three races also showed their power. An evil dragon with 8 claws swallowed a cluster of bright stars and turned it into the purest energy, shooting out a destructive dragon breath. A 7-colored phoenix soared into the sky after letting out a clear cry. Its body was burning with countless divine flames of the great path, turning the starry sky into a turbulent sea of fire. The void was burning with crackling sounds. A 5-scar void master fell into the endless sea of fire and turned into ashes, not leaving any residue. The Qilin race was even more terrifying. A 3-headed Qilin would leave a flame mark in the void with every step it took. It exuded endless tyrant's might, making people want to bow down and kowtow. Their opponents were the first and second Sky Glory Patriarchs, who had been sleeping since ancient times, and an old monster who was no weaker than them. Facing these 3 people, the powerful cultivators of the Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans had no chance of winning. Sword, come. The divine power of the number 1 sword Dao in the universe was that of Wu Jianxian. With one sword, she could overturn millions of galaxies and suppress the starry sky. A cold light flashed in her eyes. Although she was a woman, she was not weaker than anyone present. Sometimes she opened the heavenly gate with a sword strike, and sometimes her sword chi rushed into the sky. Her strength had unknowingly reached a level that even Supreme Tarot might not have been able to reach. There were also a few other team leaders like Great Void Divine Emperor, Supreme Zero Wood, Supreme Sway Shi, Supreme Black Source, and others who also erupted with an incomparably resplendent light. This kind of battle was simply unprecedented. In such a battle, who dared to claim to be invincible? Who dared to claim to be on top? The Invincible Supremes and 6-scar Void Warriors all displayed their abilities and shook the world. For a moment, they were fighting each other. After all, at their level, there was not much difference in combat strength. Each of them had their own trump card, and it was difficult to determine the winner in a short time. However, the battle between ordinary Scar-level Void Masters and Supreme Experts was much more intense. In this battle, the Scar-level Void Masters and Supreme Masters, who were considered big shots in the universe, were not even considered cannon fodder. From time to time, Supreme Masters would die, letting out cries of great Tao. The number of casualties among them was rising in a straight line. The worst thing was that the situation between the ordinary Supreme Experts and the Void Masters began to tilt in the favor of the Void Universe. All of this had come from a monster with a dog head and a human body, wielding a giant axe. He was wearing a set of broken lava armor, and his body was surrounded by a faint blue light. There were no pupils in his eyes, only blue light. Staring into his eyes was like staring into the abyss. On his left shoulder, which was not covered by the lava, 5 long scars were extremely dazzling. On the battlefield, he was simply a war machine, a death god that had returned from hell. No one could stop him. He held a giant axe that looked like a pharaoh's scepter in his hands, and the blue light around his body formed a halo. He smashed down fiercely and instantly killed a half-invincible supreme expert of the divine power universe. What was even more bizarre was that after the half-invincible supreme expert was killed by the dog-headed monster, he turned into a long string of blood beads that automatically fell into the dog-headed monster's mouth and was swallowed. The dog-headed human-bodied monster's slight injuries were instantly healed, and his aura rose sharply. If he were to kill a few more people, he would probably be able to threaten an invincible supreme. It could be said that this dog-headed human-bodied monster alone had affected the entire battle. Not only did he recover from his injuries, but he's also stronger. What kind of monster is he? Long Qing, who was in an extremely embarrassing situation with his dragon scales damaged, looked at the dog-headed monster with a frightened face. There was no dignity in his eyes anymore, only extreme fear. He was a half-invincible supreme, and he could be considered an expert of this cultivation realm. He would not have been killed by a single axe strike, but he was not any better off. He was sent flying by the dog-headed human-bodied monster's axe strike, and a section of his dragon horn was cut off. There was also a huge wound on his body that was so deep that his bones could be seen. In the distance, Ninth Culpa King's face was also extremely gloomy. He could not defeat this dog-headed human-bodied monster. If he had been at the same cultivation level as the dog-headed monster, he was confident that he could defeat him or even kill him. However, his cultivation level was too low, and he was still a step away from reaching the high supreme level. If this goes on, all the ordinary supremes in the universe will be killed by him and turned into nourishment for his strength. When that time comes, once he powers up more, the short-term balance between the invincible supreme and the six-scar void master will be broken. At that time, it's very likely that we will lose everything. At this moment, the Ninth Culpa King, who had always been proud and arrogant, also felt bitterness in his mouth and despair in his heart. Trash from the divine power universe, quickly surrender to me, the Hell King. The dog-headed human-bodied monster laughed wildly, looking at Ninth Culpa King, Long Qing, and the others with eyes full of contempt and disdain. Is this the power of a divine power universe? It's so weak that it's scary. The dog-headed monster shook his head and licked his lips. His eyes were filled with greed and cruelty. As long as he could kill all these people and turn them into his nourishment, it would be enough for him to break through to the six-scar level, right? At the thought of this, the dog-headed monster chuckled and walked toward the ordinary supreme in the divine power universe with the giant axe in his hand. He raised his giant axe high and prepared to strike. Under his giant axe, several high and top supreme realm martial artists were in despair. Before he could strike, ding! A bright sword light, like a heavenly river flowing backward, crossed the sky and suddenly came from the distance. What? The dog-headed human-bodied monster, who was holding a giant axe and was about to slash down, felt the cold sword intent that was locked on him and charging at him at high speed. He could not help but slow down and slowly turn his head to look. Ha! The dog-headed monster let out a soft gasp, and his pupils could not help but shrink. At the same time, Long Qing, Ninth Culpa King, and many other people who were fighting all stopped their movements and looked up at the bright sword light that cut through yin and yang. This is Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang is back. Countless people in the divine power universe shuddered and exclaimed. In the 5,000 years that Jian Wushuang fought, he conquered countless people with his own strength and made a great reputation for himself. Swish! In the blink of an eye, the sword light arrived with a loud bang and ruthlessly struck the dog-headed monster. Weak trash! Seeing this, the dog-headed monster laughed fearlessly. The long axe in his hand swept out and collided with the Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand. Ding! Ding! An extremely sharp explosion sounded. Immediately after, a huge shock wave spread out from where the two were fighting in a fan shape. The terrifying power it contained shattered the void and raised dust into the sky. Quickly retreat! The cultivators and void warriors who were fighting around them all changed their expressions and quickly retreated. Immediately after, everyone saw that the muscular dog-headed human-bodied monster, who called himself Hell King, seemed to have been hit by a heavy hammer. His entire body drew an arc and shot out from the dust that filled the sky, his legs leaving 2 long traces in the void. Gradually, the smoke and dust gradually dispersed, revealing the figure of a black-clothed youth. This young man was dressed in black and had black hair. His face was cold and indifferent, and his pale golden eyes were emotionless. The purple Chuan character between his eyebrows was dazzling and flirtatious. His 5 well-defined fingers held the tarot divine sword, and a powerful sword pressure materialized. With him as the center, it spread out and suppressed all directions. It's Jian Wushuang indeed. Jian Wushuang has become stronger. An intermediate supreme martial artist. Jian Wushuang had broken through to the intermediate supreme stage. What a fast cultivation speed. Instantly, countless people's pupils shrank. They could feel that Jian Wushuang was stronger than before. Not only was his cultivation stronger, but his entire person was also stronger. The current Jian Wushuang was like a peerless divine sword that could tear the 9 heavens apart. His eyes were filled with great pressure that no one dared to look at directly. Jian Wushuang looked around indifferently and immediately saw countless familiar faces. 9th Culpa King, the Overlord Patriarch Maluo Yengu Longqing. There were too many people who had grudges with him, and they were all injured and in an extremely miserable state. I'm back. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with battle intent. The battlefield was where he should be. Then Jian Wushuang tilted his head slightly and looked at Hell King. Although Hell King was sent flying by Jian Wushuang's sword, his aura did not weaken at all. The deep sword wound on his chest grew new flesh rapidly. In just a few breaths, he had recovered. Weak trash. Do you know that you're challenging a great existence? Hell King said with a sinister smile, and an even more terrifying aura emanated from his body. Sensing this aura, everyone's expression changed. It was as if Hell King with a dog's head and a human's body had turned into the abyss of death. You're noisy. Jian Wushuang looked at him expressionlessly. Then, he turned into a golden light and charged at Hell King again. A vast sword essence gushed out of Jian Wushuang's hands. In an instant, Jian Wushuang and the tarot divine sword disappeared. In the world, only the sword light that broke through all darkness and brought dawn to the world remained. It was domineering, fierce, and sharp. No words could describe this terrifying sword strike. Life is a part of reincarnation, and your part has already ended. Mortal strike. Hell King roared, and endless blue light gathered on the blade of his long axe. Then he chopped down on Jian Wushuang. This attack was far more powerful than the previous one. It could be said that it was already standing at the peak of the half-invincible supreme realm. Rumble. As the 2 attacks collided, the heavens and earth shook as if countless worlds were collapsing. An even greater shock wave spread out instantly, enough to annihilate hundreds of stars in an instant. People from both universes who were fighting around them retreated again. A 3-scar Void Master was just 1 step slower and was crushed into powder by the aftermath of the battle between Jian Wushuang and Hell King. Jian Wushuang's right hand, which was holding the sword, trembled. The power of the axe was enough to blow up the sun. Even with his chaotic, domineering body, he still felt a little tired. And this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that Hell King's axe seemed to have devouring power. At the moment of the fight, it wanted to devour Jian Wushuang's life force and cultivation. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang was a perfect chaotic life form. He only needed to circulate his divine power slightly to suppress the devouring power. Oh? He actually blocked it? It seems like you're stronger than those ants. Hell King squinted his eyes, and a slightly surprised look appeared on his face. However, the next moment, his lips curled into a deep and sinister smile. However, in front of me, you're just a slightly stronger ant. It can't change your weak nature. Mortal strike. Countless rays of blue light gathered on the blade of the long axe in Hell King's hand, and he hacked down at Jian Wushuang. You're too slow. Jian Wushuang sneered and immediately activated the secret skill of Dragon Blood. His speed suddenly increased by 10 times, and in a flash, he appeared behind Hell King. The sword chi of the Tarot divine sword in his hand burst forth, and he slashed at Hell King's head. Open sky! Annoying trash! Do you only know how to sneak attack? Hell King frowned. Speed was indeed his weakness. However, he also had a way to deal with it. Clang! He first raised his long axe to block the sword strike, then took a step forward to put some distance between him and Jian Wushuang. In the end, he raised his right hand, pointed it at Jian Wushuang and said, "Void technique, withering rhythm." As soon as he finished speaking, countless blue lights gushed out of the void and gathered in his palm, forming a blue vortex. The next moment, the blue light rushed out of his palm and pierced into Jian Wushuang's body. All of a sudden, Jian Wushuang's speed slowed down and his aura began to decline. Like a flower bud in the autumn wind, it gradually withered. In the void, the entire universe had been split apart. The battle between the Invincible Supremes and the Six Scar Void Masters was the most dazzling. They could crush stars with their hands and shatter the Milky Way with their feet. Each of them was an ancient existence, and the aura they exuded was enough to annihilate 3,000 worlds. Apart from the battle between the Invincible Supremes and the Six Scar Void Masters, the most eye-catching battle was the battle between Hell King and Jian Wushuang. The Hell King was an evil god worshipped by many in the depths of the Void universe. He had been in a deep sleep until the universe erupted in a catastrophic war. Only then was he awakened by the Void god. As for Jian Wushuang, he was undeniably the #1 genius of the divine power universe. He was truly unbeatable below the Invincible Supreme realm. With the two of them as the center, a vacuum was created within a radius of 10,000 miles. Hell King held a long axe and looked at Jian Wushuang, whose aura was weakening, with contempt. He sneered and said, "Your life will come to an end here. Let me, the great Hell King, end your life. Mortal strike." With a roar, Hell King took a step forward and turned into a blue shadow. He held the giant axe and chopped at Jian Wushuang again. Jian Wushuang could not help but squint his eyes and his face turned slightly serious. He was already mobilizing his divine power to suppress and expel the power of decay in his body, but it would take at least 10 more breaths to completely remove it. And 10 breaths was enough to determine life and death in the duel with Hell King. Tarot Sword Manual, 3rd move, Dusk. Tarot Sword Manual, 4th move, for seasons. Innate divine power, primordial universe. Jian Wushuang opened his mouth slightly and spat out these words coldly. Then, he brazenly used 3 divine techniques. For a moment, the Hell King's feet, which were originally shooting forward, could not help but slow down, as if he had sunk into a muddy pool. His speed seemed to have been slowed down and moved in slow motion. This was an innate divine power, the primordial universe. A divine power similar to mine. Hell King squinted his eyes. Before he could react, an extremely terrifying suction force suddenly came from under his feet. Like a big hand, it grabbed his bare feet and pulled them down ruthlessly. This is, for the first time, a look of shock appeared on Hell King's face. Below him, a huge pit appeared like a black hole. Be it dark matter in the universe or all kinds of energy aftershocks, they were all affected by the gravitational force of the twilight pit at the same time and sank into the concave pit. At this moment, it was as if the universe had collapsed. In this crater, the vast and majestic sword chi was like a huge millstone that silently destroyed everything. In an instant, the bones and flesh of the Hell King's feet were ground away. Nearly 10,000 years ago, when Jian Wushuang was just a primary supreme, he had almost killed Wang Lu, who was also a 5-scar Void Master, with the Dusk move. Now that Jian Wushuang had broken through to the intermediate supreme, his strength was more than 10 times stronger. And this was not the end. The 4th move of the Tarot Sword Manual, for seasons, descended. Countless swords rained down on Hell King, and the entire universe changed. The moment the 3 divine arts were used at the same time, there was a faint sound of the Great Tao collapsing. At this moment, everyone, regardless of whether they were from the divine power universe or the void universe, was dumbfounded and flabbergasted by this scene. Their bodies trembled non-stop. This This is still a battle between ordinary supreme martial artists? I'm a top supreme expert, but I have a feeling that I won't be able to hold on for even one breath of time in the face of Jian Wushuang's 3 divine powers. He's too strong. Just by looking at the battle between these two, and without considering their cultivation levels, I'm afraid they're close to being invincible supremes. The people from the divine universe looked at each other and said. Ninth Culpa King's pupils shrank, and a complicated look flashed across his face. He quietly clenched his fists. He had been arrogant and conceited all his life and only regarded Jian Wushuang as his opponent. However, in just over 100,000 years, Jian Wushuang, who was inferior to him in all aspects, had burst out with an attack that made him admit defeat and feel inferior. The Hell King, who had suppressed him and made him feel despair, was now on the verge of being killed by Jian Wushuang. The one with even more complicated emotions was Long Qing from the Dragon Clan. This guy, how did he grow so fast? He looked at Jian Wushuang with extreme jealousy. In the past, Jian Wushuang was just an ant struggling at death's door in his hands. But now, the battle strength that Jian Wushuang had displayed was an existence that he could only look up to but not reach. Compared to the shock of the divine power universe, the void universe was filled with fear. Other than the 6 Scar Masters, Hell King is the most powerful being in our universe. He's going to be defeated. If Hell King is defeated, what can we do to stop him? The eyes of the Void Warriors flickered. They hesitated, wondering if they should launch a void explosion together to support Hell King. Let's not talk about the reaction of the crowd for now. In the corner of the void, 7 black-robed men were standing in the air with their hands behind their backs. The leader was a strange man wearing a mask with red stripes that only revealed one eye. Hey, that little guy. All of a sudden, Devour 7, who was ranked 7th, turned his eyes slightly and looked at Jian Wushuang and Hell King, who were fighting. Then, he squinted his eyes and said, If I remember correctly, that sword-wielding little fellow? What's wrong, Devour 7? Devour 1, who was wearing a red mask, noticed the strange tone in Devour 7's voice and asked indifferently. Lord Devour 1, that little guy with the sword seems to be related to Xianxia. I wanted to catch him back, but the Supreme Master of this universe saved him. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I let him go. I didn't think that this person would improve so quickly in just 100,000 years. He was only a second-stage ruler back then, but he's already grown to such a level, Devour 7 said. Hearing that, Devour 1 did not change his tone. He just nodded and said, There's nothing impossible about someone related to Xianxia. Should we capture him now? Devour 7 continued to ask. Devour 1 thought for a while and shook his head indifferently. There's no rush. Let's see how he performs first. I think he might be a key chess piece in Xianxia's big plan. As soon as he finished speaking, a golden card appeared in his hand, trembling slightly. Die! On the battlefield, Jian Wushuang looked at Hell King, who was trapped in the dusk pit, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. He then activated the 3 superpowers to the extreme. Rumble! In an instant, 3 forces landed on Hell King's body. Hell King's burly body was suddenly filled with divine blood. Thousands of sword chi slashed him until he was skinny, as if it was raining blood. The people from the 2 universes were shocked to the extreme when they saw this scene. I can't believe that an intermediate supreme martial artist can unleash such power. This is simply unprecedented. He's too strong. My scalp is going numb. Jian Wushuang's sword is so terrifying that it's going to explode. Countless people exclaimed in admiration. Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold as his body gradually rose into the air. Tarot Sword Manual, 4th move, 4 seasons. Winter to spring, spring to summer. As soon as he finished speaking, a huge sun appeared behind Jian Wushuang. The surface area of the sun was even larger than 10 ordinary suns. The scorching heat burned everything, reflecting a red light on the universe. On the surface of the sun, there were burning flames as if 10 suns had fused into a huge fireball. It was indescribably terrifying. The next moment, explode! In an instant, the The huge fireball rolled toward the dog-headed Hell King. In the void, there was a loud explosion. Hell King looked up at this scene, and finally, he could no longer maintain his composure. He roared, "Break! Death incarnation!" As soon as he finished speaking, something terrifying happened. Buzz! Countless blue flames rose from Hell King's skin, forming a thick flaming armor. He stood proudly in the netherworld with a long axe in his hand. His entire body was burning with blue flames, and the universe around him began to wither at the same time as if the god of death had descended. Shatter! A look of madness flashed in his eyes. He first raised the long axe in his hand and chopped down fiercely, shattering the twilight pit under his feet. Then, he opened his mouth again and let out a roar that shook the 9 heavens and 10 lands toward the rolling lava sun. Void explosion! Boom! The blue flames burning all over his body gathered in his open mouth, forming a huge blue ball with thunder and lightning. As soon as this blue ball appeared, it immediately exuded a surging world-destroying might that far exceeded all of his previous moves. Hell King is forced to use Void Explosion. It seems that Jian Wushuang has forced him to use his trump card. As long as Jian Wushuang can survive this move, Hell King will die. Countless supreme experts of the divine power universe clenched their fists, and their hearts were in their throats. Whizzes! The blue ball turned into a pillar of light as thick as the mouth of a bowl and instantly shot out from Hell King's mouth, heavily hitting the falling lava sun. In an instant, the world went silent. A dazzling light burst out from between the two. In the next moment, everyone saw that the lava sun was directly pierced through the middle by Hell King's void explosion blue ball and scattered in all directions. Good! Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He did not look panicked at all. Instead, his eyes were burning with fighting intent. The surging battle intent soared into the sky and shook the 9 heavens. Tarot Sword Manual, 5th move, Tarot. Jian Wushuang said coldly, word by word. In an instant, a Dharma power appeared behind Jian Wushuang. A handsome young man with a flagon in his left hand and a sword in his right hand appeared behind Jian Wushuang. He was staggering, but he looked extremely unrestrained. It was none other than the man who had laughed at the heavens and earth at his peak, Supreme Tarot. Previously, Jian Wushuang had not been able to fully display the power of the 5th move of the Tarot Sword Manual. Now, after Jian Wushuang had broken through to the intermediate Supreme Realm, the power of this sword move was no weaker than a real strike from Supreme Tarot. As Jian Wushuang slowly raised the Tarot Divine Sword, Supreme Celestial Tarot appearance behind him also raised the Tarot Divine Sword. Slash! Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold as he spat out the word. In that instant, Tarot Supreme and Jian Wushuang had become one. A dragon-like sword chi was instantly slashed out by the Tarot Divine Sword, splitting the heavens and earth, piercing through the sun and the moon. Before this sword strike, it had already surpassed the realm of a half-invincible Supreme. After the sword was slashed out, the entire sky seemed to dim, leaving only the brilliance of the sword. Even many invincible Supremes and 6-scar Void Masters who were fighting in the distance could not help but turn to look at Jian Wushuang. This guy's attainments in the way of the sword have already reached such a high level? The captain of Team 7, who had once been the #1 expert in the Tao of the Blade in the entire cosmos, Supreme Black Source, sighed in admiration. This little fellow is becoming more and more like Tarot. Wu Jianxian's beautiful eyes also flashed with a strange color. Just now, she actually felt a bit of the heroic aura of Supreme Tarot from Jian Wushuang. This made her heart skip a beat. Hell King lost. Meanwhile, in the void, where Devour One was standing, Devour One, who was wearing a red mask and stroking the golden card in his hand, shook his head and said indifferently. The next moment, he stopped playing with the golden card. When this kid grows up, he will become a trump card in Xianyi's hands. I should bring him back for modification. Bang! The dragon-like sword rainbow finally collided with Hell King's ball of void explosion. This sword could flatten mountains, fill oceans, kill immortals, subdue demons, and even kill gods. Almost in an instant, The overbearing and destructive void round ball was cut open diagonally by the sword as if it was a knife cutting tofu. With a wave of his hand, the sword cut through the thorns and once again slashed toward Hell King. No! Hell King's expression changed drastically, and his eyes were filled with fear. He had just woken up from a deep sleep, and he still had to show off his skills in the universe. He still had countless grand plans and great undertakings to do. How could he die here? To die at the hands of this ant that he had regarded as trash? Just as he was about to turn around and escape, he saw the most brilliant sword, which had turned heaven and earth into a line, cut into Hell King's body. Rip! In an instant, a sword mark appeared on Hell King's majestic body from his left shoulder to his right waist. Immediately after, swish! Hell King's body was split into two by the sword. Swish! Hell King's body twisted and struggled, trying to be revived. However, the overbearing sword chi crushed him repeatedly. Hell King's life force quickly dissipated. In just 10 breaths, Hell King had completely turned into a pile of black ash. With a stir of the sword chi, he turned into nothingness. With one sword strike, Hell King was killed. The Hell King had fallen. His body quickly crumbled and turned into countless black ashes, which were stirred by the strong wind in the air and completely dissipated. In the void created by Hell King and Jian Wushuang's fight, only Jian Wushuang was left. He stood with his sword, his face proud, and his black robe untainted by the mortal world. He looked like an immortal or the peerless sword god, Ling Chun. Everyone looked at Jian Wushuang in a daze. They had not expected the battle to end so quickly. They had expected that Jian Wushuang would win, but they had never thought that Hell King, who had just used Void Explosion, would be suppressed by Jian Wushuang with a single strike. This victory came too quickly, so fast that they could not even react. Jian Wushuang won just like that. Ninth Culpa King, Overlord Patriarch, and countless supremes of the divine power universe looked at each other in shock. For a moment, the entire place was deathly silent. 3 breaths later, the entire universe was boiling. The heavens bless the divine power universe. An old supreme expert clenched his fists tightly as his entire body trembled with excitement. The heavens have blessed my divine power universe. How could such a monstrous genius like Jian Wushuang be born? Back then, the 6 forces, including the Great Void Temple, the Dragon Clan, and the Cosmos Temple, wanted to kill Jian Wushuang. Fortunately, Jian Wushuang survived. Otherwise, we would have been in great danger. Jian Wushuang is the treasure of our universe and the hope of the future of our universe. You can't have any other thoughts about him. Countless people were emotional. The few Supreme Masters who were about to die under the Hell King's axe but were saved by Jian Wushuang in passing widened their eyes and looked at Long Qing, who was cowering at the side. They said pointedly, "Jian Wushuang is my savior. From now on, I will follow his lead." Not bad. Without Jian Wushuang, Tianfeng would have died in the hands of the dog-headed human-bodied monster. In the future, anyone who dares to say anything bad about Jian Wushuang will be my enemy. This old man too. Jian Wushuang, you're the one who gave me my life. From now on, if you have any orders, just tell me. If I, Jilwan, dare to say no, I'll be struck by lightning and die a horrible death. These people spoke one after another. Long Qing shrank to the side and looked at Jian Wushuang with a complicated look. A touch of fear flashed in his eyes. Jian Wushuang's sword had split heaven and earth, separated the chaos, and pierced through the sun, moon, and star river. It was too terrifying. He asked himself he absolutely could not receive this sword strike. How did this guy's strength increase so quickly? Long Qing muttered to himself. He had cultivated for 130 chaos cycles and become a half-invincible supreme. He was an inconceivable figure in the entire universe, and even amongst the dragon race, he would be ranked in the annals of history. He had been one of the leading figures of the 4th generation of the dragon race. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, had already surpassed him in battle strength even though he had cultivated for less than 1,000,000 years. The difference was so great that he felt despair. In the void, as Jian Wushuang killed Hell King, the morale of the entire divine power universe rose a little. On the contrary, the people of the void universe looked ashen and trembled like a sieve. Kill! Jian Wushuang's black hair flew in the wind as he stood proudly in the void and said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang took a step forward and turned into a sword rainbow that pierced through the sun and the moon again. He then charged toward the camp of the void universe. Behind him, the supremes of the divine power universe roared in response. Kill! 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 Countless intermediate, high, top, and even half-invincible supremes, led by Jian Wushuang, burst out with earth-shattering killing intent and charged toward the camp of the void universe. They were like a sharp knife that was ruthlessly stabbed into the void warriors of the void universe, and Jian Wushuang was the sharpest tip of the knife. Sundering stars! Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold as he raised the tarot divine sword and slashed down. In an instant, the low groans of Buddhas and the wailing of demonic gods came from the tarot divine sword. The tarot divine sword's blade instantly trembled 1,000,000 times, forming a silver sword rainbow that was 100,000 feet long. This sword crossed the heavenly river and dominated the starry sky. It was as if an immortal from the high heavens had descended. Swish! With one sword attack, he had killed over 100 void masters. The entire camp of the void universe was in a state of mourning. Even if there were experts who did not die from the sword, they would be killed by Ninth Culpa King, Old Monster Iron Fence, Overlord, and others who followed closely behind Jian Wushuang. After a while, the scale of victory between ordinary supremes and ordinary void masters gradually leaned toward the divine power universe, not to mention the battle between void gods and cosmos gods, or the battle between the invincible supreme and the 6-star level void master. In the void, where Devourers was located. Devour 1, aren't we going to attack? Devour 5 said with a frown. Devour 1, who was wearing a red mask, did not reply immediately. Instead, he just stared at Jian Wushuang with his right eye. His eyes, which were usually calm, flashed with a slight splendor. Xianxia, you've got a good hand. As if sighing, Devour 1 sighed softly. Then, he raised the golden card in his hand and threw it at Jian Wushuang. In an instant, the golden card spun out of his hand. Then let's do it. On the battlefield, as Jian Wushuang was slashing with his sword, he suddenly seemed to sense something. He raised his head and stared at a certain direction in the void. A touch of surprise flashed in his eyes and all the hair on his body stood up. The next moment, a golden card jumped out of the void and enlarged in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Jian Wushuang felt a sense of great terror from the moment of life and death. A chill ran from his back to the top of his head. The card had a sense of danger that he had never felt before. This is... Jian Wushuang was shocked and he subconsciously wanted to run away. However, before he could lift his foot, a strange power suddenly exploded from the golden card. In an instant, a power that could fold time and space came out of the golden card, and the entire universe began to tremble quickly. The next moment, then, something terrifying happened. It was as if the three-dimensional time and space had become two-dimensional. Whether it was Jian Wushuang, the starry sky in the universe, or the other members of the two sides who were fighting, all of them stopped moving and turned into a painting. Jian Wushuang, the countless stars, and the others all disappeared. All that was left was a painting that floated down from the void. As for Jian Wushuang and the others, they had all become the people in the painting. This was dimension reduction. What was the dimension reduction attack? If the universe was a three-dimensional space and everyone was a three-dimensional existence, then the two-dimensional space was completely different from the three-dimensional space. For example, the pictures in the paintings, the characters in the little human-sized books, etc. They were flat, rigid, and without any vitality. This golden card could fold the space in all directions, forming a direction in the three-dimensional universe. It compressed and folded the space, causing it to collapse. All of this was too terrifying. Jian Wushuang did not even have the space to struggle. He felt that his entire body had been shackled and he could no longer move. In the distance, some people from the two universes who were not within the attack range of the dimension reduction suddenly gasped in shock. What kind of supernatural method was this? They looked at each other, their eyes filled with intense disbelief. Such a method was far beyond their understanding. Even an invincible supreme, who could destroy millions of stars, crush countless galaxies, and swallow the sun with a single breath, even they were shocked. They had never heard of a small card that could change the structure of the universe directly without a sound. Only some of the older Void Masters of the Void Universe were dazed for a moment. Then they seemed to have thought of something and trembled. The Devourers! Devourers are here! Back then, Ancestor Hong Ye's sect had tens of thousands of disciples. They offended the Devourers and were annihilated by the Devourers' dimension reduction strike. They looked around in panic. The Devourers had come out of the Void Universe with them, but they did not feel happy when they saw the Devourers. Instead, they were in a panic. Devourers could not be predicted with common sense. They were mysterious, strange, and powerful, like a bottomless ocean that no one could see through. Even Void God had never mentioned the Devourers during the two great catastrophe wars, nor had they forced the Devourers to take action. This group's background was terrifying. As expected, after they finished speaking, 7 figures in black robes walked out of the void. They were all dressed in loose black robes and had different figures and appearances. There was a woman with an enchanting appearance and a sinister smile that could charm all living beings. A tall monster with a wolf head holding a long black saber and a body full of strange tattoos. A fat giant like a meatball, and a thin person who was wearing a red mask that only revealed one eye walking in the front. He was Devour One. Even in Devour, he was the most mysterious existence. Even the other members of the Devourers did not know much about him. It's them. The pupils of the many Void Masters in the Void Universe shrank, and they quickly dodged, staying far away from these 7 people, not daring to block their way. The Devourers walked into the universe with an indifferent expression. He stretched out his hand and the golden card that reflected the starry sky, as well as Jian Wushuang and the others, immediately rotated and flew back into his hand. Buzz! Just as the golden card was about to fall into Devour One's hand, an old giant hand covered with age spots suddenly appeared in the void. When the golden card was about to reach Devour One's hand, it grabbed the golden card and pulled it back into the void. Oh! Devour One slightly raised his eyes, looking at the void where the giant hand had retracted. An old man with turbid eyes, age spots all over his face, and an aura of decay was slowly walking through the air. The old man was none other than Supreme Gai Fu, the leader of the 5 head supremes of the Divine Life Palace. Supreme Gai Fu remained silent, but his back was straight. He held the golden card in his hand and looked at the 7 Devourer members with a calm expression. When Devour One saw Supreme Master Gai Fu take the golden card, his expression was also calm, but a slight surprise flashed in his eyes. He said, "Oh? This universe actually has people of this level." As he finished speaking, he shook his head as if he was feeling sorry. He then muttered to himself, "It's a pity that my life source has been severely damaged. I'm afraid I don't have many years left to live. It's impossible for me to take this step and reach another level." When the people around them heard this, they could not help but scratch their heads, and a look of confusion flashed across their faces. Take this step? What level was he at? What did that mean? Supreme Gai Fu's turbid eyes did not waver at all when he heard this. He only said indifferently, "With me here, you can't take Jian Wushuang away today." After saying that, a red flame gushed out from Supreme Gai Fu's hand and burned the golden card. The golden card immediately burst into green smoke and began to twist. After a few breaths, Jian Wushuang and the others, who had been sealed in another dimensional space by the dimension reduction attack, leaped out of the void one after another. Jian Wushuang's face was pale, and his forehead was full of sweat. He first looked at the 7 members of the Devourers with deep fear in his eyes. This dimension reduction attack was extremely terrifying. In the face of this dimension reduction, he could not resist at all. He was suppressed and sealed directly. He could not use any of his divine powers. Even though he had been saved by Supreme Gai Fu, he still could not help but feel shocked and furious. At the same time, he had a flash of understanding. He finally understood why the billions of living beings in the Tarot Divine Kingdom, which had been established by the Supreme Tarot, had all been killed in an instant. After hearing what Gai Fu said, Devour One did not look angry. He just looked at Jian Wushuang deeply and said, "Believe me, we will meet again." As soon as he said that, a pool of black water appeared under the feet of the 7 people led by Devour One. The 7 of them gradually sank and disappeared from the starry sky. Jian Wushuang finally heaved a long sigh of relief after they had left. He looked at Supreme Master Gai Fu with surprise, but he was more grateful. "Senior Gai Fu, thank you for saving me." He paused for a moment. "You?" Jian Wushuang asked. "Are you okay now?" Supreme Gai Fu nodded his head. Just as he was about to reply, his old face flushed red and he opened his mouth to spit out black divine blood. As he spat out this mouthful of divine blood, Supreme Master Gai Fu's already rotten aura became even more dispirited. "Senior Gai Fu." Seeing this, Jian Wushuang's expression changed and he quickly reached out to help Supreme Master Gai Fu. "Don't mind this old man." Before Jian Wushuang could reach out to support Supreme Master Gai Fu, he saw Supreme Master Gai Fu wave his hand at Jian Wushuang, indicating that he was fine. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang could only stop what he was doing, but his heart sank. Supreme Gai Fu's body won't last much longer. When Supreme Master Gai Fu saw Jian Wushuang's expression, he forced a smile on his face and comforted him. "Jian Wushuang, you don't have to worry. Life and death are normal. I'm relieved to see your achievements today. Even if I really leave this time, I think that with you taking care of the Divine Life Palace in the future, the Divine Life Palace will definitely be better than under my leadership." The situation was not optimistic for the Divine Power universe. Although Jian Wushuang's participation had basically secured the victory in the war between ordinary Supremes and Scar-level Void Masters, the real deciding factor between the victory and defeat of the 2 universes still depended on the battle between the Invincible Supremes and the others, as well as it was a battle between Void God and Cosmos God. Thanks to the reinforcements from all directions, the number of Invincible Supremes in the Divine Power universe was not much less than that of the 34 Void Masters. However, in terms of battle strength, they were still inferior. White Ape, the Overlord Patriarch, was fierce and overbearing. Every punch had the power to explode stars. It attacked from the left and right. Under a series of indiscriminate attacks, it immediately suppressed the right Void Emissary and forced him to retreat. However, aside from him, the other Invincible Supremes were all at a disadvantage. Wu Jianxian, who was originally invincible with her sword, immediately fell into a disadvantage after fighting the Void Master Gu Heng. Void Master Gu Heng, an ancient figure who had once dominated an era in the Void universe. In terms of cultivation time, he was several times longer than Wu Jianxian. All kinds of killing magical powers emerged from his hands, forcing Wu Jianxian to helplessly block without the power to fight back. The most important thing was that the Void Master Gu Heng had a pair of copper rings. This pair of copper rings was hard and indestructible. They were unusually firm and had the ability to enlarge and shrink. The 2 copper rings were each other's horns and could be pulled from left to right. It was extremely difficult to deal with. "Absorb!" Void Master Gu Heng put his hands together and shouted. In an instant, a yellow light surged from the copper rings and extended out like a rope. One of the copper rings first wrapped around Wu Jianxian's divine sword, causing the other copper ring to hang around Wu Jianxian's body. Then it suddenly tightened and bound Wu Jianxian. Wu Jianxian's expression changed. She wanted to break free, but this copper ring was like the 5 elements mountain that suppressed her. It grew as big as Wu Jianxian and shrank as she shrank. It did not give her the slightest chance to escape. "Ha ha ha ha, little girl, just surrender obediently. I see that you're a good girl, so as long as you're willing to be my servant, I'll spare your life. If you're more obedient, I can even ask the Void God Lord for a reward when I conquer this universe. It's not impossible for you to be the master of a star field." Void Master Gu Heng laughed, but he did not show any mercy. A short blade the size of a finger suddenly appeared from the copper ring that bound Wu Jianxian, trying to kill her. "You're looking for death." When Wu Jianxian heard this, a cold glint flickered in her beautiful eyes. Her killing intent had reached an extreme. Divine power, shape-shifting. Wu Jianxian coldly spat out these words. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a flash of light from her body. Not far from her, a figure that looked exactly like her appeared out of thin air. Bang! Wu Jianxian, who was bound by the copper rings, was instantly ground to death by the copper rings, turning into a pile of shadows. Kill! Wu Jianxian's face turned pale for a moment. Then, she took a deep breath and once again raised her sword to attack the Void Master Gu Heng. On the other side of the battlefield, a six-scar Void Master with a pair of wings on his back and a hunched waist had his hands hanging down to his knees. Then, his hands twisted and turned into two long and narrow sharp knives. Dragon Clan? Hee. I'll eat you. The six-scar Void Master stepped forward and leaped like a flying mantis toward one of the third-generation dragons. His hands, which had turned into sharp knives, flickered with a fierce cold light in the air, enough to split the stars and cut the moon. Roar! Seeing this, the third-generation dragon's eyes flashed with panic, and he spat out a planet-sized ball of purple poison. The battle between the Invincible Supremes and the six-scar Void Masters had become more and more intense and had entered a state of white heat. Although no one had died yet, it was only a matter of time before the Invincible Supremes of the Divine Power universe died. At that time, once an Invincible Supreme died, the balance between the top fighting forces of the two universes would be broken, and the Void universe would have free hands, creating a situation of 2 against 1. At that time, the defeat of the Divine Power universe would be decided. Turning back to the scene of Jian Wushuang and Supreme Master Gai Fu. A single spark can start a prairie fire. Supreme Gai Fu took a deep breath, and a determined look flashed across his eyes. Then I'll use my old body to turn into the fire that will set the prairie on fire. Just as he was about to jump up and burn himself to become the first fire to burn the Void universe, Jian Wushuang suddenly patted his shoulder. What? Supreme Gai Fu turned his head, puzzled. Senior Gai Fu, I won't stop you if you want to do something. However, before that, I want you to see something, Jian Wushuang said softly. Then, he flipped his right hand and an iron token appeared. The token was given to Jian Wushuang by Supreme Dao Yen, the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace, in the Land of Gods. Supreme Gai Fu was stunned when he saw the rusty token. Then, his turbid eyes suddenly turned red. It had been 100,000 void eras. It was unknown whether the Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace was alive or dead. But Supreme Master Gai Fu was the one who carried the flag. The world only knew that the Divine Life Palace had been established by Supreme Dao Yen, who was then guarded by Supreme Gai Fu. No one knew that, back then, Supreme Master Gai Fu had been the shadow behind Supreme Dao Yen and the most loyal old servant. Young Master, he's still alive? Supreme Gai Fu said. He did not address him as Palace Master, but as Young Master. Perhaps it had been a long time since he had called him Young Master. So when he said it, it sounded a little stiff and obscure. Yes. Jian Wushuang nodded. Supreme Master Gai Fu laughed when he received Jian Wushuang's confirmation. For the first time, he laughed freely, as if he had been relieved of a heavy burden, and as if he had nothing to worry about. Jian Wushuang, since the young master has given you the Palace Master token, you are now the second Palace Master of the Divine Life Palace. I have no regrets. As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Gai Fu raised his head and looked at the battlefield between the Invincible Supremes and the six-scar Void Masters. An unprecedented powerful aura gushed out of his body. What's going on? This aura is... In an instant, the six-scar Void Master and the Invincible Supreme who were fighting in the Void Universe stopped fighting and looked down in confusion. Thus, they saw Supreme Gai Fu, whose entire body was burning with supreme divine power. It's him. It's this guy. He's still alive? Some of the people who had participated in the previous Great Catastrophe War and knew Supreme Gai Fu had looks of fear on their faces. Back then, Supreme Master Gai Fu had still been young, but he had been one of the main forces of the Divine Power universe. He had almost no rivals at his level. For this reason, the Void Universe had specially sent several six-scar Void Masters to besiege Supreme Master Gai Fu. They clearly remembered that Supreme Master Gai Fu had been seriously injured and on the verge of death. Quickly retreat. This lunatic is planning to take us down with him. Suddenly, a six-scar Void Master's pupils shrank as if he had realized something, and he shouted in horror. As soon as he said this, the faces of these six-scar Void Masters changed and they retreated rapidly. Some of the invincible Supremes from the Divine Power universe were also shocked, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. That guy, Gai Fu, Great Void Divine Emperor, ended the battle and panted slightly. He looked at Supreme Master Gai Fu with a complicated gaze. He and Supreme Gai Fu could be considered enemies and friends. Before the Great Catastrophe War, the two of them had many grudges. However, after the Great Catastrophe, the two of them became comrades who fought side by side. Supreme Gai Fu even saved his life on the battlefield. Thus, his feelings for Supreme Gai Fu were rather complicated. It was precisely because of this complexity that when Jian Wushuang had almost killed Supreme Bing Yi, he had only reminded Jian Wushuang and not killed him. Instead, he had left the depths of the universe with Supreme Bing Yi. Otherwise, with Great Void Divine Emperor's power, even if he had killed Jian Wushuang, the Divine Life Palace would not have been able to do anything to him. Jian Wushuang, I'm leaving. The world belongs to you young people in the future. After patting Jian Wushuang's shoulder, Supreme Gai Fu finally turned his head and took a deep look at Ninth Culpa King. Then, without hesitation, he stomped his right foot heavily and turned into a soaring flame, like a meteorite that cut through the sky with a trail of flames. With a kind of righteous posture, he ruthlessly crashed into several six-scar level Void Masters who were retreating. Teacher! It was Supreme Gai Fu who had brought him back from a remote star field and given him a home. This was his first time cultivating, his first time awakening a perfect grade special life form, his first breakthrough, and his first time being called the #1 prodigy of the Divine Life Palace. All of this had been bestowed upon him by Supreme Gai Fu. To him, what really made him fight with his back to the wall was not the billions of living beings in the universe or the people in the Divine Life Palace, but the look of approval in Supreme Gai Fu's eyes. This was the last look he saw. However, there was only sorrow in his heart, not joy. Boom! Under countless gazes, Supreme Master Gai Fu ruthlessly crashed into several six-scar Void Masters. With this collision, Supreme Gai Fu broke through his shackles and returned to his peak. This collision was the most powerful attack that Supreme Gai Fu had unleashed at the last moment of his life. This collision was unstoppable and as easy as crushing dry weeds and rotten wood. No! Void Master Gu Heng roared in fear. Void explosion! At the same time, Sky Spider, whose body was covered in spiders, used his most powerful technique, Void Explosion, and blew up all the tentacles. There were even more six-scar Void Masters who used all their skills. However, in front of Supreme Gai Fu, all of this was useless. All of this was useless. These sacred arts were instantly obliterated the moment they came into contact with the soaring flames that Supreme Gai Fu had transformed into. They retreated rapidly, trying to return to the Void Universe through the Void Crack to avoid this attack. However, to their despair, just as they were about to enter the Void Rift and return to the Void Universe, they were shocked to find that the Void Rift between the Void Universe and the Divine Power Universe had been sealed for some reason. What's going on? Why is it like this? What happened to the tear in the void? Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! The faces of countless six-scar Void Masters turned ashen. Looking at the fire in their eyes, which was getting bigger and bigger, they felt as if their hearts were being torn apart. There was no escape. They could not avoid it. Even the cracks in the void had been sealed for some unknown reason. They did not have time to think. Whoosh! Supreme Master Gai Fu turned into a raging flame and swallowed all these six-scar Void Masters in an instant. In the fire, the desperate roars of the six-scar Void Masters were heard, as well as the screams of horror. This was a strike unleashed by Supreme Gai Fu, who had burned his life force. It was dazzling, and shocking. Boom! A moment later, it was as if a huge, brilliant firework had exploded in the boundless starry sky. It was so huge, so poignant. Countless people looked at this firework and forgot to breathe. Their eyes were dazed. As the fireworks gradually dissipated, Supreme Gai Fu was nowhere to be seen. Along with him, at least 3 six-scar Void Masters had also disappeared. It was as if the world had deleted it. There was no aura left in the void. The raging flames that had burned the sky and turned all life into fury not only burned the six-scar Void Master of the Void Universe, but also Supreme Master Gai Fu himself. Supreme Gai Fu had fallen. Countless people were stunned, as if they had been frozen. They looked at this scene stiffly, with only endless shock and admiration in their eyes. With his own body, he turned into a towering rage, shattered the sky, stepped into the 9 nethers, and had no wish or regret. Old friend. There was a complicated look in the eyes of the Overlord Patriarch as he sighed softly. He had once discussed the Tao with Supreme Gai Fu in the Eastern Sea. He had once used the boundless starry sky as a chessboard and the stars in the sky as chess pieces, forming a deep friendship with Supreme Gai Fu. Supreme Gai Fu, you are worthy of respect. The sloppy Taoist Immortal Hulu took a deep breath and poured out a cup of clear wine from the gourd in his hand, sprinkling it into the starry sky. I'm sorry to have met you in such a way. Even though he was not acquainted with Supreme Martial Artist Gai Fu, he was completely awed by his courage and fearlessness. Teacher. Ninth Culpa King's face turned pale in an instant, as if he had been drained of all his strength. His legs turned soft and he almost fell from the sky. Jian Wushuang, who was in the crowd, did not speak. However, he felt as if there was a heavy stone on his chest. It was extremely heavy and even his breathing became slow. In the Divine Power universe, the 34 Void Masters had already retreated to the edge of the off-world battlefield. Behind them was the crack in the void. However, the void crack that was originally unimpeded and allowed them to enter and exit as they wished had been completely sealed. There was no path behind him, but there were pursuers in front. Supreme Gai Fu's attack, which was formed from the burning of his life source, had reversed the situation. At least a few of the 34 Void Masters at the 6-scar level had already fallen to Supreme Gai Fu's desperate blow. The remaining 30 or so Void Warriors all had their robes torn apart and were in a sorry state. They looked at each other, their faces ashen. Lord Void Emissary, what should we do now? A 6-scar Void Master said in a deep voice. The white-haired, burly old man with a bare upper body did not reply. Instead, he glared at the Overlord Patriarch and the others with a cold gaze, his eyes filled with fear. Although Supreme Master Gai Fu's desperate attack had taken away several 6-scar level Void Masters, including ancient almighty experts like Void Master Guheng and Sky Spied, this was not the worst news. What made the white-haired old man's heart sink the most was the closing of the Void Rift. He had just tried to communicate with the people who had survived in the Void universe, but he realized that as the crack closed, their communication was also cut off. This meant that they did not know what was happening in the Void universe. And most importantly, they could not go back. The laws of the Void universe and the Divine Power universe were not connected, and even the things they cultivated were different. This meant that they could not recover and replenish their Void power in the Divine Power universe. The battle with the Divine Power universe had just come to an end and they were at their weakest. They couldn't replenish their Void power, so the Divine Power universe could slowly wear them down. After taking a deep breath, the right Void emissary of the Void universe, the white-haired, burly old man, had a flash of determination in his eyes. He said, "Contact Lord Void God immediately. Otherwise, we'll all die here." After saying that, the right Void emissary squeezed out a drop of black blood from his fingertip and pressed it between his eyebrows. In an instant, the right Void emissary seemed to have sensed something. He immediately knelt on the ground and kept muttering the words to summon Void God. "Kill!" On the other side, the eyes of the Overlord Patriarch flickered, and he coldly uttered the word "kill." He turned into a rolling sun first, and his right fist gathered thousands of wind sounds, blasting toward the 34 Void Masters of the Void Universe. The other Invincible Supremes also unleashed all sorts of killing techniques and followed closely behind. Take his life while he's down. It was not just Invincible Supreme who moved. At this moment, Jian Wushuang, Ninth Culpa King, and the other ordinary Supremes also had killing intent in their eyes. Jian Wushuang took the lead and rode his sword across the sky. Behind him, Ninth Culpa King activated his innate magical ability, the evolution of gods and demons. Kill, 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 kill. All of you will die. All of you, go and be buried with teacher. Ninth Culpa King's white hair turned into a coquettish red at this moment, and 2 blood moons appeared in his eyes. A violent and crazy aura gushed out of his body. What? Jian Wushuang turned back to look at Ninth Culpa King, and he could not help but be shocked. Ninth Culpa King was possessed by the devil? If Supreme Master Gai Fu's death had dealt the greatest blow to anyone, it would undoubtedly be Ninth Culpa King. In Ninth Culpa King's heart, Supreme Master Gai Fu's position was more important than his parents. He had helplessly watched Supreme Gai Fu fall in front of him. At this moment, he had actually fallen into bedevilment. Die! A 3-scar Void Master stood in front of Ninth Culpa King. Before the Void Master could make a move, Ninth Culpa King's big hand had already slammed on his head. His head was directly smacked into his chest and then turned into a pool of meat sauce. Die, 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 die! Go to hell! Ninth Culpa King's palms danced wildly, and each palm strike directly killed a Void Master. Ancient black divine patterns emerged on his skin, and his aura rose at a rapid pace, the peak of the intermediate supreme realm. Perfect intermediate of the supreme realm. Bang! High supreme realm. He had broken through. After breaking through, Ninth Culpa King's combat strength had simply soared. Previously, Ninth Culpa King was calm, proud, and indifferent. But now, he had completely turned into a human weapon, a raging sea. However, his aura did not stop there. It was still soaring. His cultivation level was rising at an unprecedented speed. No one was a match for him. The area within 100 miles of him had completely turned into a purgatory of Azura. Not only were the ordinary Void Masters in the Void Universe scared out of their wits, but even the Supreme Masters in the Divine Power Universe felt their eyelids twitch and their hearts tremble in fear. One is Ninth Culpa King, and the other is Jian Wushuang. These 2 people from the Divine Life Palace are more abnormal than the other. An old Supreme expert said. In my opinion, as long as Jian Wushuang and Ninth Culpa King join forces, I'm afraid these 2 can sweep away all the ordinary Void Masters in the entire Void Universe. Right? It's a resplendent era. An era of great struggle. I'm afraid the current Ninth Culpa King is not much weaker than Jian Wushuang. The Supreme Martial Artist sighed with emotion. On the other side, after Jian Wushuang took a glance at Ninth Culpa King, he also began to kill. Jian Wushuang's massacre was even more direct and destructive than Ninth Culpa King's. He was like a scholar who traveled far with a book, but also like an immortal who did not touch the mortal world. There was no expression on his handsome and cold face. However, the sharp sword chi from the Tarot Divine's sword in his hand swept out in all directions and shot into the sky, frantically harvesting the lives of the Void Masters in the Void Universe. Many of the weaker Void Warriors had just seen Jian Wushuang's sword move, and the sword that was like a white dragon had already killed them. Countless people looked at Jian Wushuang and they all thought the same thing. He could travel 3,000 miles with one move, and command 1,000,000 troops with one sword. Who said that a scholar is useless? A scholar holding a sword is also a king. Just as the slaughter reached its peak, the right Void emissary, who was constantly sending messages to the Void God, stopped talking. Immediately, rumble! The sky cracked. The figure of an old man with white hair and a white beard was the first to fly out of the crack in the sky. Lord Cosmos God! Everyone's eyes narrowed slightly. The expression of Cosmos God remained the same. However, there was an obvious crack on his right sleeve. Everyone's heart sank when they saw this. Then, they saw Void God shrouded in endless black fog walk down from the sky with his hands behind his back. He did not use any void power, but it was as if heaven and earth were automatically lifting him up, as if the demon god from the 9 heavens had descended. The world and the universe were playing a sad song for him. Void God's red eyes, which were only revealed, moved slightly. He saw the many Void Masters who had been forced to shrink to the side and the right Void Master who was kneeling on the ground. Useless trash.